everybody. We are here for the Ask the Candidate event for the Bellbrook School Board election in November. We have Dr. St. Pierre, Heidi Anderson, Cassie Kipling, Mike Kinsey, Audra Dorn, Joshua Presnell, Sarah Williamson, and Kevin Price. We have a series of 16 questions we're going to ask, and each candidate will get 2 minutes to answer the question. And we have a timer, so just stay within your 2 minutes. And when everybody's ready, I can start. We're going to start with Keith. Are you ready, Keith?
I'm ready.
Okay. Our first question is, why are you running? Will you stand for what you believe in if you're in the minority? And since you'd be in charge of policy, please tell us a little about your general political perspective / stances.
Well, I'm running because I believe that my experience as a former superintendent for 24 years in the district could be a benefit for the students, staff, the board, and believe that it's important to make a difference for kids. I still have a passion for working with kids, and it's a great school district. And I want to be part of that again.
Awesome.
What was the rest of the question?
Since you'd be in charge of policy, please tell us a little about your general political perspective / stances. Sorry.
Well, as far as policy is concerned, besides the fact that our policies need to be reviewed, I don't believe they've been reviewed in several years, and that's an obligation of the board. So I think that's something we should take up, and it will take some time to do that. I'm going to stand for policies that are the best for kids, seek input from the community, parents, staff, administration, take recommendation from the superintendent. But as a board, we should work together to develop those policies. And the answer to the other question is, if there's controversy, which is likely, unfortunately, as I smile about that, I'm going to take a stand for what I think is the best for kids, getting the input from a variety of folks so that I know how they feel about the matter, do my research, and then make a decision. And hopefully that's in conjunction with the other board members, but if not, I have to stand on what I think's right.
Okay, thank you. Heidi?
Now, I lean conservative, and I'm very proud to lean conservative. I will definitely listen to all viewpoints, and I've lived in this community for 32 years, so I'm here to for the long haul. And I'm a Bellbrook graduate, so I've been the subject of those policies, and I think that reviewing those policies is definitely necessary in keeping them consistent with the world that we live in today. As a teacher, I'm a state certified teacher, and as a teacher, I always want to make sure that I'm doing what's best for kids first, taxpayers second. We need to make sure that whatever we're doing is what's best for the kids, not what's trendy, not what's politically correct, but what's best for the students in our care. And I will stand up and fight whoever comes for our children and the values that our families are instilling in those kids. But this community is my passion, and I had some great teachers growing up here, and one of them was my government teacher, Mr. Woody, and he said, if you can sit here and complain about a situation, you can stand up and do something about it. So that's what I'm trying to do, instead of being a keyboard warrior, actually putting myself out there and taking a stand.
Cassie?
So the reason I'm running for school board is because I believe that the community needs a board that represent the interest of the entire community. I'm a mother of 3 children, ages 5, 7, and 9. I'm also a supervisory engineer at Wright Pat, where I lead a team of roughly 10 engineers, and we have to deliver results on time and on budget, which is both extremely important for a school board member. One of the key attributes that the Air Force instills in its leaders is the ability to make data-driven decisions. This skill set will be extremely beneficial in facing many of the obstacles our district has faced or will face in the coming years. Data-driven decisions can easily be applied to fiscal planning, COVID safety measures, alleviating transportation issues, incorporating community engagement, and working with the district staff to restore trust in the board. I'll be proactive with my decisions and push for a board to look to the future and not only focus on the problems in front of us now. I will ensure we have an active 5-year forecast, and an update to outdated or incomplete board policies. I'll ensure we follow board policy and create pandemic/COVID with clear trigger points for when masks are necessary. I have also already formulated what my COVID plan would be and have begun circulating it within the community. This summer, I circulated a petition to gain support for the entire community to restore additional busing, and I've also provided the board with several options on how this can be done. I want to ensure everyone has the voice that they need in the community. I want everyone to realize that they will be heard, and that if we take the time to ask the community their opinion or to ask a survey, I will make sure your interests are actually conveyed.
Thank you. Mike?
Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Kinsey. I'd like to begin by thanking you, Charlotte, and Rob, and everybody behind the scenes for putting this on. I really appreciate it. The first question is, why are you running for the board? So I love public schools. I'm a champion for public schools. I'm a proud public school advocate. I'm the son of a retired 35-year educator. And my wife, Joanna, and I, we've been in the area since 2005. And we moved to our current house in Sugar Creek Township about 9 years ago. And that was right when our first child was born. And during those first sleepless weeks that many of us parents know about, I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And I went into a deep dive research about where I wanted our children to go to school. By every objective measure, subjective measure, Bellbrook schools, was the clear winner. So we started looking for a house. It took us about a year, but that's why we moved to Bellbrook Sugar Creek schools for the school district. So I want to play any part that I can as someone who loves our schools to try to heal the division that's plagued our community for so many years. I believe that if we can come together, work together, talk together again, and hold on to our small town values, that we can continue the tradition of excellence that Bellbrook Schools has. One of the questions was, how does it feel to be in the minority? I've been in that position here. I've only been on the board for like 5 minutes. I was appointed in June, but there have been some difficult votes, and I voted in the minority to respect parental choice. So I'll just let that stand for itself.
Thank you. Sarah?
Oh, it's my turn.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sarah Williamson. I'm running for the 2-year seat on the Bellbrook Sugar Creek Board of Education. I am the mother of 3 boys, not choice. They all range in age from 7 to 7 months old. So I am invested in the long-term growth of our schools. I'll be here for quite a while. I established a small business here in Bellbrook in 2019. I own a yard greeting business, and it was one of the first kind in the entire Dayton area. I spent a lot of time working on the ground in the communities I serve to spread awareness of my services. I believe that this outreach was a winning strategy. My business is now well established. We hire local employees. We're consistently hitting growth targets year over year. And prior to opening my small business, I was an owner, or I managed commercial and residential properties for about 10 years. So those experiences have given me a lot of foundation of working with a lot of different communities, crafting policies, maintaining financial discipline. As an experienced professional and someone who's passionate about my community, I feel that I would make an excellent board member. School boards should be a representation of the entire community in which it serves. So this election is our opportunity to make our voices heard, to see what kind of board we want to have. So I am committed to transparency, and you will always know why I make my choices, whether you agree with my stances or not. I support evidence-based proactive protocols aimed at assisting all students. I will emphasize forward-thinking planning that is guided by science and is informed by expert recommendations. I think we should be engaging with our students, teachers, and most directly affected by the process and listening to their views and experiences. And I think these practices will ensure our students receive a public education of the highest quality.
Thank you. Kevin?
Hello, I'm Kevin Price. I currently sit on the board. I've been on the board for almost 2 years now. I was appointed in January of 2020. I am running on so I can continue on the board. I feel like there's a lot of work that yet needs to be done, and I have a perspective on that because we have 6 children. My wife Joyce and I have 6 children. They've all attended and gone through the Bellbrook school, so it's given me a first-hand perspective, K through 12, with my children. And the end of the day, I really want to pay it back. I'm so grateful to both our community and our school system for the opportunities that we've had as a family, and then for my children as individuals to go through a very caring and very effective school system. So I just really want to pay it back. I think a lot of people in the community know I'm retired military. I've lived all over the country. I've lived overseas. It's given me perspectives on school systems throughout the country, different ways of doing business. So bottom line, I just want to just continue to pay it back. As far as being in the minority, last year, whenever we were contemplating what levy to put on, or actually earlier this year, I advocated twice, and I was voting in the minority last year to go with a limited period levy versus a permanent levy, so we can address the concerns of the community with respect to the really high property tax burden we have here. So I'm up for looking for alternatives. With respect to policies, we have actually, since I've been on the board, we have reviewed and revised a number of policies. So that process is in place. We may need to expedite it or make it more thorough, but certainly that process is already in place. And so I appreciate the opportunity to continue serving on the board. I'll continue to advocate for transparency, as I have done. Anybody that goes to our meetings knows I've been calling for that since I've been on the board. So thank you very much, and look forward to this conversation tonight.
Thank you. Josh?
Hi, my name is Josh Presnell, and I'm running for the Board of Education because I believe that the children of this district deserve the quality education that their parents chose for them, as well as a safe and supportive environment for them to learn in. I believe that providing that for the community will require strong leadership skills, the ability to gain a civil consensus, and a fiscal responsibility, 3 skills which I've continually demonstrated as a successful business executive. Not only have my proactive initiatives in my company saved about $500,000 a year this year, but I started and still operate a successful side business selling home automation and integration systems that I developed. I also understand the public education system. My mother and mother-in-law retired as public school teachers, and my wife and I co-chaired the school levy pact through 3 election cycles until we finally passed the levy. Leading up to those campaigns, my wife and I gained an expert-level understanding of Ohio's policies for public school finance and property and income tax laws, key skills to understanding historical data and planning for the school's future. For the district's success, board members will also require creative problem-solving skills, a dedication to proactive planning with a goal for community and staff consensus, the willingness to listen and to judge varying expert opinions, the ability to collect, analyze, and process complex sets of data, and a willingness to communicate openly with the community about what is working and what isn't. That transparency is desired by the community and will be needed in the years to come to continue necessary support for our children. I am running to ensure that our community's children and the staff that is responsible for their education have what they need to ensure educational quality, safety, and diversity in the Bellbrook Sugar Creek District. I'm asking you to write in my name on your ballots this November to vote for a transformational change in leadership for our schools. In regards to policies and politics, I generally run fiscally conservative, slightly leaning on the liberal side for social policies. So it's kind of a summary there. Thank you.
Thank you. Audra?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Audra Dorn. I have been serving on the board since I was appointed last winter. I began my term in January. To answer why I'm running, I probably should say why I initially applied in December of last year. I had been attending school board meetings for some time. I was interested in mostly special education policy, what was going on with the levy, and I just wanted to know. And what I witnessed was a bunch of people who you could tell cared about the community, but they always agreed and they rarely discussed. So I ran with that in mind, and to that board's credit, to include Kevin, I told them that in my interview. I said, I think you guys don't disagree enough, and if you do, it's behind closed doors, and the community either wants to know, but when you all agree, you seem apathetic and you seem like you are not passionate, even if you are. And so I advocated for more civil disagreement on the board and more open discussion. And since January, I think you'll see that has occurred. I will stand for what I believe when I'm in the minority. However, I negotiate for a living, so you'll probably see a bigger push for me to have those discussions and try to meet somewhere in the middle, just because that's in my nature. Not that I will cave to a difficult decision by any means, but having polar ends of the spectrum are generally not in the best interest of our community. And regarding politics, I don't think politics has any place in education. I think there are too many people right now across this country who are trying to bring politics into our education system, and that's not what I'm about.
Thank you. Okay, question 2, Heidi, we're going to start with you. And if you need me to repeat anything, anybody, just ask.
Okay.
Question 2, what is your stance on levies? Do you support an income tax levy? What kind? How would you address the funding issue at the state level, and how would you address the funding issue from a school finances level?
Well, as the courts have decided, Ohio school finance is unconstitutional. However, they left it at that. There's been no teeth behind it. I think that while our taxes seem to the taxpayer very high, I believe the research has shown that they're on par with what everybody else is paying in general. However, I do not feel that property tax levies are fair to our taxpayers, nor are they fair to the students who have to watch their programs be cut because we can't pass a levy. And I think the community is done passing levies. They don't want to pass any more levies that are tied to their homes. So I think that one of the most disheartening things, I've been going to board meetings for several years, and one of the worst things I ever saw was a board member who did clearly hours worth of research and brought up an idea of an income tax levy and was immediately shot down by other board members saying, we've been there, we've done that, it didn't work. But they quoted how much it had failed by, but it was pretty much in line with what the current levy was failing by. And so I think that's just a complacent cop-out answer. So I think that we need to join with other school districts and force the state to give us the fair share of tax dollars, but also make sure that we are taxing those more heavily who came here just for the district and who will most likely move out when their children are finished. So if an income tax is what it does, then I think that's more stable funding for our students and fair to our taxpayers.
Thank you, Heidi. Cassie?
I actually agree quite a bit with what Heidi just said. Ideally, I would love to end every 4 to 5 year levy cycle that we have. The system has to change. It's not sustainable what we have right now. I agree that we should have some sort of income tax levy. I think that's the way to actually make it more fair. I know a lot of senior citizens are on fixed incomes, and it's not right that they're put in a financial constraint because of the schools. So what I would like to see is an earned income tax levy. I am not a financial expert. I would want to bring in a financial advisor to help us look at what does our budget need to be to fund the schools right now, set that level, determine what % income tax we would need, and see what actual property taxes we can get rid of. So we can operate off of an actual income tax levy, earned income tax levy, moving forward. That way, as the community succeeds and their income increases, as it increases with inflation, so does the budget of the school. And we can actually set the budget there, and the school really is living within the budget that the community has set. Is there any other piece to that question? No.
What was your stance on levies? Do you support an income tax levy? How would you address funding issues at the state level and at school finances level?
So for the state piece of it, I think we need a ban with Beaver Creek because they're in a lot of the same situation that we are. I think the two communities need to go to the state. I think there's one other community in the whole state that actually is also solely on property taxes. So the three of us need to work together to actually go to the state and say, look, this is our situation. We need to get more advocates, so it's not just us, the little guy, going to the state by themselves, but the system does need to be changed.
Right. Thank you. Mike?
Really glad you repeat all the questions. Let's see what I can hit here in 2 minutes.
Just ask if you need me to repeat anything.
That's good.
We're not going to
Thank you.
rush. If we don't get through everything, that's fine, but I want everybody to understand what the questions
No,
are.
I appreciate that very much. The biggest problem that we have is Columbus's unfair redistribution of our state tax dollars. Most people don't know. Some know, but far too many don't know that only about a quarter of our school's operating funds come from Columbus. So that leaves all the rest of it that has to come from property taxes. Due to a change that got passed as part of the June budget just this year, I think ironically called the Fair School Funding Plan. They're trying to address the unconstitutional nature in the way our schools are funded in this state. And as a result of that, Bellbrook Sugar Creek Schools is going to get an additional $145,000. That sounds like a lot until you compare it to other districts around the state. There's a neighboring district, which is about twice the size of ours, Kettering, which is going to receive an additional $16 million in additional funding. So that disparity really puts us in a hole. Just another anecdote of why I think we need to come together as one. Vote yes, vote no, coming together with one voice pointed towards Columbus. Most folks know that the state lottery, by law, has to use their net proceeds to go into the state general education fund. And by law, they have been doing that since 1983, whenever the law was passed. But what most folks don't know is that as soon as that money goes in the front door to the education fund, our legislators have been withdrawing the exact same amount through a back door. That's to the tune of billions and billions of dollars over the last 30, 40 years. Imagine if we had that money and what it could do for us. So I want to look at an earned income tax levy. I think that all options need to be on the table at the local level while we come together as one voice. And I want to, as Cassie said, I want there's to form a coalition of many districts around the state to address the unfairness at Columbus.
Thank you. Sarah?
Okay. I agree with a lot of things, and I disagree with some of them, so I'm going to try to be quick. I think we do need to hold Columbus more accountable for the decisions that they're making as far as funding goes, but I think that that goes even further is to stop electing people who are not going to make school funding a priority. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. We can't just keep going to them and saying, you're not fair. Like, they haven't been fair for a very long time. So we need to start electing people that are going to prioritize school funding so that we can actually make some kind of a headway. I feel like we've been screaming the same thing for 20 years and it hasn't made any difference. I am not a personal fan of an income tax levy or an income tax, but I think we should have some kind of a committee to explore that option and see if it's what the community wants. I would wholeheartedly support that if that's what the majority of our community wants, but we need to be able to do some kind of investigation, see how much we would need, maybe do some polling around our community to see if it's something that people would be interested in doing, because an income tax can have a very large range. What are we talking about? We haven't even had any time to explore that financially. What was the other part of this question?
Stance on levies. Would you support an income tax levy? How would you address the funding issue at the state level and from a school finances level?
Okay. I think I might have answered all of that.
Okay. So are you wrapped up?
Yeah.
Okay. Kevin?
Are we ready? I don't see.
He'll be on another camera.
I'm sorry, I don't see the light on. Okay, Kevin Price here again. For those of you that have followed me over the last couple of years, this is even before I got on the school board. You would know that 2.5 years ago, I actually voted against the levy. I based that upon my experience of living throughout the country and recognizing our property taxes here were disproportionately high. They were probably 3 to 4 times what they would be from what we had in Utah. So the levy failed in May of, get my years mixed up here, I think it was May of 19. And subsequent to that, we started seeing cuts in the school district that were unpalatable. And so I started studying the subject and became very much aware that school funding is a very complex topic in the state of Ohio. And I really then came to learn that it's really no fault of this district whatsoever. If you wind back the clock to 1980, this district got on the order of 60% of its funding from the state. Today it gets about 25%. So therefore it has to come at the expense of our community, which is just unacceptable. So in the last year, I pushed passionately for a limited period levy. It turned out to be a 7-year levy. It passed, and thank you to the community for that because our schools were on the ropes. But my strategy behind that was I wanted to see a fire get lit in the community to do something as an alternative. Our options are, some have been mentioned tonight, are earned income tax, but also look at potentially the kickback for the exorbitant income taxes that we send to the state. So indeed, we have to do something. The clock is ticking. I have ideas. I have promoted those and done my best to speak to them, but we have to end the heavy and over-reliance on property taxes of this community. And I look forward to working with the community. This is not just a board issue. This is a board and community issue. We need to form a committee. We need to come up with a plan and then move forward from there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Joshua.
I guess to the first point of do I support levies in general, I think it's fairly clear that that's the only mechanism the state of Ohio has given us to fund our schools. And that's the mechanism we have to use in the light of the funding that the state of Ohio gives us for our public school systems. Is the amount that they give us unfair? Yes. Do we or any small coalition in Southwest Ohio have the ability to force them to do anything about it? Probably not, when the 3 Supreme Court cases went and got cited on the behalf of the schools, and the Columbus has done nothing in regards to that yet. So I think levies are with us, and it's an unfortunate reality that we have to live in. Do I support an income tax levy? I agree with Sarah that that should be at the decision of the community. I think it's something we should absolutely look into. It's something we should discuss in terms of what the options really would be. Raising income tax, an earned income tax levy is slightly different than property taxes. You have to do it in specific increments of specific percentages. And it can be hard to dial in specifically the kind of budget you're looking for, and that can be a challenge. So I think there's a lot of hurdles to overcome there, but I would certainly entertain it. In regards to overall government policy, I think we should absolutely support the House bill that's currently being considered to adjust the credit for the seniors to be able to increase that with inflation, and that's currently working its way through our House as well, and that would be a good benefit for us to be able to offset some of the property tax burdens they're currently facing. But I also think we need to continue to push for addressing as long as possible we can keep our current budget going within the schools, and look at cost savings and measures we can do to keep that budget under control as long as possible.
Thank you. Audra?
All right, maybe I'm going to come, after 8 of us, I'm going to try to come at this from maybe a different angle. Regarding income taxes, I've had a lot of philosophical conversations about income taxes during my term so far. I understand the push for an income tax, and that it does increase with inflation. It would remove the need to, or hopefully remove the need to constantly go back to the community to ask Mother May I over and over again. However, I'm also aware that the number 1 reason people move to our community is for our schools, and the number 2 reason is probably because we don't have an income tax, and that's a very real thing to a lot of individuals in our community. So we need to be cognizant of that as well. I am also painfully aware that the recent levy fights have simply torn our community apart. So as much as fiscal matters are important and need to be addressed and will need to be addressed during this term, I prefer to handle them with fiscal responsibility first, completely living within our means for as long as possible, but knowing that this most recent levy is only a 7-year levy, and we will need to go back eventually for more money. But during a 4-year term, I am not interested in pursuing any further levies. The only levies I would be interested in even discussing would be the potential for an academic discussion regarding an income tax levy that would be in some way in exchange for retiring of property tax, because frankly, this community, this board, this school district, and this community, I don't think has it in, we don't have it in us to go put our community through this again. I'm not there.
Thank you. Keith?
Tax levies are always a burden on communities, and it's certainly so for ours, and they've been difficult to pass, and I certainly understand that and have been a part of that for years. I'm not opposed to income tax. First superintendency I held over 30 years ago, we passed an income tax successfully, and that district has found stability financially as a result of that. I think if we're going to look at something like that, I agree with Audra, we're years out from needing to do that. I think you need to survey the community, see what the interest is before you start down that road. In the meantime, we need to look at what we can do with the state. I can tell you that I've met for over 30 years with state officials, and the only two that ever paid any attention, as far as I was concerned, to the superintendent's plea to give us some property tax relief from the state because the DeRolf court case was Senator Lehner and Cupp. No one else ever came forward, so there was no coalition of representatives to make a difference. Very unfortunate. So our choice is to wisely spend money and keep that in line for years to come. We've got a 7-year levy. We should be able to live within our means. Look at our general fund, plan ahead, involve folks in the planning. Look at our capital improvement monies, get folks involved in planning, community, staff, administration, parents. Look at our Federal CARES Act. What are we going to do with those monies? Spend it for lower classes, maybe for K-6, tutoring for kids who are in need, especially after last year's COVID debacle. Kids need help. But I think we should put together a fiscal plan and manage our money, and we should be easily well past 4, 5, 6 to 7 years, barring some emergency, of worrying about any levy and any more burden on this community.
Thank you. Cassie, this is going to be your starting question. What is your stance on mask mandates in school? When should they be implemented and when should they be removed? That's it.
Wow, I'm the most outspoken one on this one, maybe. So my biggest thing is anything regarding masks needs to be a data-driven decision. So I've actually looked at all of the data. I've pulled it from the time COVID started. I have actually been trending this data at home by myself, and I've looked at the plot of where we're at and what are the CDC recommendations. The CDC says if you're above 100 cases per 100,000, you're in high transmission. We hit that at the beginning of August here. We did not go to masking for K through 6 until we were essentially at our peak at the beginning of September. That's a problem. My plan would be anytime you hit that 100 cases per 100,000 for 5 days, go above 5 days, and I'm open to discussing this if I were on the board to make this decision. If you're above it for 5 days, that's your trigger point for masks. You go below that for 5 days, that's your trigger point for masks to come off. For anyone that's interested, as of today, because I looked at these numbers today, we're at 180 cases per 100,000. We're trending in the right direction. When masks went into effect earlier this school year, we were at 660 cases per 100,000. That's way too late. We had too much transmission going on in the schools. Those are my personal trigger points. I'd be open to discussions and debate on how to revise those numbers, but I want it based on data so we don't have to actually have the community arguing and everyone's feelings going back and forth and have 4-hour board meetings. It'd be a trigger point. You hit that threshold, masks go on, hit the threshold again, masks come off. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
I actually agree very much with Cassie that it needs to be a data-driven decision. All expert opinions need to be on the table. Where I think I disagree with many of the candidates, though, is who makes the decision. It needs to be a data-driven decision, but I believe that whenever possible, it needs to be families in consultation with their doctor who make the healthcare decisions, whether we're talking about masks, vaccines, whatever the case may be. So we have COVID protocols in place, hand washing, hand sanitizing, social distancing. All of those things are fantastic and they play a part. But part of playing a part is being able to look around at our community and seeing how the rest of the world kind of looks. And I get discouraged that our schools look so different from everywhere else in our community. Whether you're just walking through the stores or you go to a Friday night football game, which that's one of our favorite things to do, you see people in the stands, you see people at indoor volleyball games. People are very aware now. This isn't a temporary emergency. We're moving into year 2 of this. There is a ton of data available, and I work in big data as a software engineer during my day job. A ton of data available. I believe that our neighbors are responsible, and they are capable, and they're intelligent enough to gather all of that data and make the decisions that's best for them and their children.
Thank you. Sarah?
I agree kind of with both of them. Cassie's done far more research on COVID numbers than I have. I do believe that we don't have to blanket mask our kids. I think that last year there were probably many opportunities that the masks could have come off instead of just staying on, but unfortunately that wasn't our decision, that was the state's decision. I would agree more with Mike if the school, the administration itself had a better plan in place on how to make it actually parents' choice. I know from my experience, my child wore his mask and probably half his class did on the first day. And then after a while, the kids don't put them back on. And then the teachers aren't allowed to tell them. So it would be possible if we sent out some kind of a form, we send out field trip forms, we send out all kinds of forms. Do you want your kid to wear a mask? It would also make it a lot easier for contract tracing for quarantine issues, which is the bigger issue, the massive quarantines that we experienced by not having a mask mandate. So if we had a better system in place from the get-go to be able to track the kids that were wearing masks, then I could be persuaded to support parents' choice, but it has to actually be the parents' choice and not like a 6-year-old who decides, I don't want to wear my mask for the rest of the day, so I'm not going to, and nobody can tell me otherwise. So I think that's
Okay.
it.
Kevin?
Could you repeat the question? I'll make sure I get it
yes.
right.
What is your stance on mask mandates in school? When should they be implemented and when should they be removed?
Regarding masks, what I have observed is that the guidance we have for masks come from the CDC in Georgia, speaking to the entire country from Miami, Florida to Anchorage, Alaska. And it doesn't allow us the flexibility of looking what's going on within our own community to make decisions appropriate for us. And so what we noticed as we got into school was we had an epidemic indeed, but it was an epidemic of quarantines and not an epidemic of actually COVID. And that was driven by recommendational guidance from the CDC, the Ohio Department of Health, and Greene County Public Health. And so initially we started school without, and very quickly we saw that the quarantines were not going to be acceptable any longer. So the kids 11 and under did not have the option of vaccines. So I listened to parental input. I thought it was rational to say, look, could you consider mask only for 11 and under until at least 2 months after a vaccine is available. What that offered up was an opportunity to avoid quarantines for that K through 11 who had no other choice than just simply to wear a mask. Grades 7 through 12 had the options of vaccine or a mask. And so based upon the numbers that I was seeing, we were compelled to go to masking. And I was the one that, from the board, made the motion, voted in favor of it for the K through 6 grades. And but it was driven by actually two things. It wasn't just the quarantine numbers. I was very empathetic to the calls from parents that were truly scared for their children. You know, they were afraid their child was going to be in grave danger by being in school where masks were not being worn. So therefore I supported it. But again, my vision and focus is on when the vaccine is available for that 11 and under group, at which point I expect to remove my support for masking for K through 6th grade. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
So, I mean, I think that COVID is here should be unarguable. Our governor has all but begged us to put mask mandates in place. The Ohio public health system has strongly recommended, as much as they are capable, to put mask mandates in place. The current numbers for the entirety of Ohio, every single county, shows community spread in the red zone. It's here, and we've been lucky so far that the illness that has been in the community has not been severe. It's getting more difficult every version of COVID that comes around to have it be less severe. It's getting more transmissible. It can get more dangerous. These are the kinds of things we have to consider. I agree heavily with Cassie that we need to have a clear plan that is brought to consensus by the community, agreed upon by everyone, that indicates the trigger points when we need to be putting on masks, when we are allowed to be taking them off, for the betterment of the students and the staff that are in the buildings trying to teach and stay healthy. And I think that Cassie's number of 100 is a good one. It's based on CDC recommendations. I would argue that we might want to consider even going into masks a little bit earlier when the rolling average is moving on an upswing, because that's the time when you want to have preventative measures. I was always taught from my grandparents that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So I want to kind of keep an eye on when the numbers are going up and make sure we're putting in a protective posture so we can make sure to hold the health in the community.
Thank you. Audra?
All right, well, my view on masks is that I hate them. I think they are a tool that should be used sparingly and on a temporary basis. And so far, my support for them has been limited to keeping our kids in school and reducing quarantines, because I do think that masking our students does have a negative effect on their education to some extent, and we can probably all agree or disagree on what that amount is. But overall, over the long term, I think masking our kids is detrimental. What is worse is having a virtual school or a hybrid school, or having our children at home who cannot come to school. Regarding data, I love data. I look at data every day. I have to constantly make these decisions. But where the data is changing, what we know about COVID is also changing. If you remember back when we all went to virtual at the beginning of this, there were 5 cases in the entire state, and we locked down every school. We knew much less. Every day we know much more. So I'm hesitant, whereas I like data, I look at trends, I'm hesitant to tie myself to a number, because tomorrow we might find out that number doesn't mean what we thought it meant yesterday. I also, when I am looking at data, I am prioritizing local data for children based on how sick they're getting, not just how many cases there are. Because as we see with kids, they aren't affected like everyone else. So that's, when I'm looking at data, I am prioritizing that particular data. COVID is here to stay. I think we know that now. This was a sprint. It turned into a marathon, and now there is no finish line. And so we need to develop a posture that we can live with long term. And universal masking is not something I consider a long-term strategy.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I would agree with most. I don't like masks either, except it's Halloween, so maybe it's time to put one on for that, just to add a little humor to a serious case situation. But they're not fun to wear. The kids don't always wear them right. Adults don't always wear them right either. I think you have to look at things to make sure. You talk about data when you implement or when you remove them. You look at medical recommendations, you look at what the staff and administration is recommending. More importantly, you look at what the parents are recommending, survey the parents, see what they're telling us. Is this something they do or don't want? Because the long-term issue for kids not being able to express themselves with a mask on, and teachers not being able to be seen expressing themselves with a mask on is, I think, probably, although I don't know that anybody's done any research, detrimental for the younger students who get real close to their teachers and understand their expressions. So I think we have to look at what's the superintendent's recommendation. Are the cases trending down in January when those of us that are elected are in office? We may not need to be wearing masks in January, but we need to have a plan for implementing. What do we need to do to take care of the kids, to make sure that they're safe and healthy, because that is our obligation as a board, and the state has passed that on to us since they haven't taken a stand this time because of the laws that they've passed. But I also agree with somebody else who said, we don't want to go virtual. We're best to have the kids in the classroom. They learn better there, most of them do. The teachers want them there, but we need to take care of the kids. So I'm going to look and see where we are in January if I'm elected, and make a decision at that point in time with all the information available.
Thank you. Heidi?
Well, my answer will be short and sweet. I am not in favor of anything that takes a parent's right to be the parent away. I know that, like, I look at the data, and the data shows that kids do not suffer from this. All 6 of my kids had COVID, and they were jumping on the couches while mom and dad were we were done. We were so sick, but they were hardly affected by it. And I know the board has said, well, they wanted to just avoid quarantines. And my concern with that is, what are we teaching the kids about tackling the tough things in life? If they know that the mask, and if you talk to kids and if you go to football games, they are not wearing masks. They're not wearing masks anywhere but in our schools. And I think that is a huge red flag. And if they truly worked, I would be all about putting them in. If they truly stopped children from dying, then I would be in favor of them. However, that's not the case. The data does not show that. In fact, I know a lot of the board members have said, well, we're just doing this to avoid the quarantines and stuff, but that means it's just theater. It's just a game. And that's not okay. And I think that we are going to see psychological effects of these kids masking for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's different if you're talking about running into the store, running into the doctor for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. These kids, in fact, I saw a meme on Facebook that said second graders and younger do not know what a normal school year is. And to me, that's unacceptable. That is just as unacceptable as kids getting sick. So for me, it would be listening to parents, always having the choice. If you want your child to wear a mask, send in a form. Your child will be, told to wear the mask, but you also need to listen to your kids. Kids don't want to wear them. They do not want to wear them. And I find it interesting that our data in our district has shown the first group to go to 0 was where masking was optional. The high school has had 0 cases for the last few weeks. So the data's there.
Thank you. Mike, you'll start off this question. It is clear that the school board and the district staff relations are not in a good place right now. How important are board/staff relations to you, and what would you do to improve them?
Yeah, I think they're extremely important. They're extremely important. That's a big piece of it. So I haven't been on the board very long. I was only appointed just 10 minutes ago. I made the joke before. So that's something I look forward to improving. We need to reach out to our teachers and to our staff. They're what make our schools great. I mean, any complex organization like a school district is great because of our teachers. When I interviewed for my position just a couple months ago, one of the questions they asked, what are some strengths that you see in our school district? And the first one I said was retention of talent. Our teachers make our schools great. So I think there's a lot we can do to reach out. But kind of with that, I also think it's important to keep in mind that really there's many stakeholders in a school district, and we all need to be co-equal voices. One cannot micromanage another. It's definitely never the role of a school board or a school board member to micromanage any of the other voices. But you have the administration. They have a very strong voice through the superintendent. You have the teachers, who have a very strong voice through the teachers union and other mechanisms. And then you also have a school board. And a school board really needs to, first and foremost, be primarily concerned with every single student and the voice of the community. So these are 3 co-equal voices that need to come together and work together for the betterment of our schools. And I think we can do that.
Thank you. Sarah?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. It is clear that board/staff relations are not in a good place right now. How important are board-staff relations to you, and what would you do to improve them?
Okay. I think that they're incredibly important, that we are listening to our teachers and our administrators that are in our buildings every day with our kids. I've seen them be ignored largely during this pandemic when they have come pleading to the board for basically what could be considered a hazardous working environment. And I understand that we have a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different people that are involved in the educating of our children, but these are the people that are in the trenches every day with our kids. They're on the front lines. I think that their opinions should take a little bit more weight because they're in there every day. They're teaching our kids, they're taking care of your kids, they're influential in all of our kids' development. So I would prioritize their feelings, I think, a little bit more over others.
Thank you. Kevin?
I'm sorry, one more time. Repeat the question.
Oh, yes.
Slow guy over here.
It is clear that board-staff relations are not in a good place right now. How important are board-staff relations to you, and what would you do to improve them?
I have to say, I honestly, I'm not sure I accept that the board-staff relations are not in a good way. I know we recently had a survey brought to us by the Sugar Creek Education Association that indicated dissatisfaction with the board with respect to the education in the classroom. And I have to have some specifics behind that. Again, I've been on the board for 2 years, almost coming up on 2 years. Anybody that has followed what I've said in public with respect to teachers, what I have posted on social media, I have fiercely defended teachers who have been attacked as being overpaid, millionaires, lazy, don't care about their children. I have fought that and addressed that as fiercely as I could, and I took total exception to that. So I'm really curious. I genuinely want to know if there's a problem and the nature of it. So I don't know the context by which the survey was circulated among the teachers, so I really need to better understand that. I think the teachers should reflect as well in the administration, or actually the teachers especially. They're working under a new contract. They received a raise. They've got some extra steps. And we are not weeding down and trying to micromanage the classroom. So I have a real hard time, at least for me personally, at least my experience as a board member, I cannot relate to a bad relationship with the teachers. Any teachers I know personally, it's a very good relationship. I see them at games or homecoming or whatever. It's a very good rapport I have back and forth. It's crickets with respect to anything that's negative. So I'm all ears, willing to listen, but at the same time, I'm not sure I accept the premise of the question. But again, I'd be willing to listen. And teachers, please let me know. I'm on the board, so I'd be happy to know what your concerns are. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
I think I have maybe a little different perspective. The board is sort of the oversight function for the administration. The administration is the primary leadership, and the staff are the workforce. I think that maintaining the trust of the staff and the administration is critically important. And I'm not sure why that trust isn't there, but I think it's an issue. As someone who has been in the schools and who likes to be in the classroom and teaching, I know what a challenge it is and what a difficult position the schools have been put into given the current environment. In fact, I was with a class last week that had their entire day with substitute teachers because it's hard to get teachers in the classrooms right now and it's hard to find substitutes. So they're working under conditions that are extremely stressful. I think the first thing that needs to be done is, working with open communication and working with the superintendent to understand the root of where that trust was lost and how it can be brought back. And I hope that can be done whether I'm on the board or whether I'm not on the board.
Thank you. Audra?
Yeah, I'm glad someone asked this question because this has been a tough one for me since I joined the board. And if anyone wants to ask Mark, the president of our teachers union, I've come to him a couple times, begging him for how do we get better feedback, more feedback from teachers. And there's this weird dichotomy where we as a board need to hear what individual teachers think. I want to know what it's like for a day in their classroom with masks on, for example, when I'm making that decision. However, there is this chain of command and they really aren't supposed to or comfortable jumping their building principal and their superintendent and coming and speaking to an individual board member, and a lot of people would say that's not appropriate. So it's really hard to make an informed decision that considers them appropriately without getting to have the really personal interaction with those teachers. And I'll be just frank, I've struggled with it. My parents were both teachers, and I got to hear those frustrations at the dinner table every night, and it's hard. Also, as a board, Mike mentioned stakeholders, and sometimes when, for example, parents want their kids back in school and teachers want to remain hybrid or virtual, I wasn't on the board during that particular fight, but it is hard, and the board ends up pitting like stakeholders versus stakeholders, and everyone can't win, and it's something you have to become comfortable with at some point, no one's ever comfortable with it, but accept that you can't make everyone happy sometimes. But truly, our teachers are phenomenal. They have been through the ringer. I hope that they, at least as an individual board member, they feel supported by me, even if they currently don't feel supported by the board as a whole. But I'm looking forward to helping mend whatever breaks there are in that relationship.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I think the board ends up in a difficult situation because the board and the superintendent are kind of linked, and the staff tends to, from my experience, legitimately so, having been a high school principal, get tied more closely, the staff gets tied more closely with their building administrator. And as boards are not supposed to micromanage, they rely on the superintendent to make that connection, and sometimes that connection is made and sometimes it's not, and I'm not being particularly critical. I will say our staff and teachers are outstanding. They are, as some of you said, under a great deal of stress, as so many people are in this country with COVID. They want the best for kids. I think some of them feel that cuts that were made were punitive. We've never cut programs before that actually impacted kids' learning, and we have done that this time and still haven't replaced them. So I point that out to you if you don't understand that. But they want to be more involved in the decision making. They want to be more involved in the planning, the academic planning, the co-curricular, the extracurricular. They want to be heard about what they need, because they do have needs. And they need to know, as some of you said, that you care about them, because they're the backbone of our excellent school district. They need more positive recommendation, where it's the bridge, the building, at board meetings, and we need to show them fairness overall and respect their input when received and ask for it if not, and we want it. Especially now, good timing to do that during strategic planning, and if we can work them into fiscal planning, which I think they need to be a part of for general fund expenditure for programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Heidi?
Yeah, when I heard that survey results, it unnerved me as a teacher, and it kind of coincided with what I'm hearing when I go out door to door and campaigning and just being a candidate for the board. I hear some of those stories, but I'm very, very concerned about the role that the union plays in our district. I think some of the questions where they had something like 131 respond that they had no confidence in the board's COVID measures, I wonder what that question looked like. Were they upset because we were putting COVID measures in and it was detrimental to their work environment? Or were they upset because we weren't putting COVID measures in and it was detrimental to their work environment? And as a teacher, I know that I did not join the union. I didn't feel that the union spoke for me and represented me well. I do believe the union has a very important role, but I worry that it is sometimes cutting out, and this may not be a popular answer, but I worry that it's cutting out teachers and their ability to communicate higher up, because they have to go through a hierarchy and go through the union. And I know that, if I was experiencing a problem when I was in a public school teaching, I didn't want to go to the union. I wanted to go to the person that I worked with daily about it. I wanted to go to my supervisor and say, hey, I'm having this problem, but the union would want me to go through them. So I worry about that dichotomy and how many teachers are not coming to the board because of that dichotomy. And I think that needs to be addressed. But my experience has been, and very surprised and pleasantly surprised, every teacher I've encountered with my children at Bellbrook has been amazing. And I just think that we need to make sure that teachers are being able to communicate, because nobody likes a negative work environment. But we also need to drill down to this data and see what kind of spin is being put on things. And any teacher should be able to come to any board member at any time.
Thank you. Cassie?
So I think it's extremely important to repair the staff-board relationship. Any board member should be able to feel like they can come to the board at any given time. The problem is board policy 3112 actually limits the board staff communication. The basic line of communication is through the superintendent. Well, I'm not saying there's a problem with the superintendent, but if they have a problem, how are you going to get that information to the board? That needs to change. So if the basic line of communication is the issue, we need to change that. The staff of this district need to have an avenue to address the board with their concerns. I would personally advocate for a change to Board Policy 3112. I would like to see it so we can have 2 board members at a time meet with the staff throughout the year to ensure their voices and concerns are heard in real time. I'm not quite sure what the right frequency is, if it's quarterly, monthly, once or twice a year. I would want to work with the board to set how often those meetings would need to occur. But the big takeaway is the teachers need to feel they can directly address the board with their concerns. If you don't have the trust, if you don't have the faith in your leadership, it's going to directly affect morale and it's going to impact your performance. And if their performance is impacted, that ultimately impacts our children. So I think it's extremely important that we repair the trust, repair the relationship, and create new avenues to have that direct line of communication. Thank you.
Okay, question number 5. Sarah, we'll start with you. What are you, is short. What are your views on COVID vaccine mandates?
As a school board member, I do not believe that is our responsibility. I do not support voting or advocating or having any kind of vaccine mandate come from the district. Any kind of mandate should rest with the state, and I don't really see that happening either. So that's my short and sweet answer.
Okay, that's great. Kevin?
No to mandating of, am I going yet?
Oh,
The lights are on.
started.
There we go. All right. Okay, so the question was, repeat the question, please.
What are your views on COVID vaccine mandates?
From a school board perspective, absolutely not. I would not support that. And it's not, as it's been throughout this pandemic, especially since this new year, the government has tried to essentially offload often the responsibilities for a response to, it's a health responsibility to school boards. And so this is one I'm not going to sign up for. I am not going to mandate a vaccine, period, dot. You can put it in concrete. That's the way it is. So thank you.
Josh, you're next.
Yeah, I suspect this is probably going to be a fairly consistent answer across the board. I do not feel that a Board of Education should mandate vaccines. That's something that is required at the state level. And if they try to abdicate it, then to heck with that, we're not going to do it. I do believe in respecting the mandates that are put in place by the state, and if they do decide that they're going to require it, then that is a required vaccine. I also support application of all 3 of the existing exemptions. Those are state law, and while those are in place, then parents should have the right to use them as they feel appropriate.
Audra?
I love exactly how Josh put that. I think the one ad I would put would be I do not support vaccine mandates for students nor staff, and I think the staff is where there is a little more nuance. I think we're going to start seeing school districts. We already have seen school districts here in Ohio that have begun to address or put forth vaccine mandates for staff, and I do not agree with that as well.
Keith?
Well, I'm a no. I would not support as a board member a COVID vaccine mandate. That is not our responsibility or obligation. That if they're going to do that, that should come from the state or the federal government, as they have mandated other vaccines through the years, and we're required to follow up and make sure that the kids have these vaccines. If they move to the school district and we don't have that information, we need to get that medical information. But no, I'm not in favor of COVID vaccine mandate at all.
Heidi?
Absolutely not. I think that's one area I think all 8 of us agree. That's awesome. But let me go a step further in saying that I do not support it for our teachers or our staff, or our classified staff, students, nobody. And let me take it even a step further in saying, should there ever come a time when there is a federal mandate, federal law, state law, I will defend our parents and our community and their right to choose what goes in their body at all times, unquestioned. So the state of Ohio allows for 3 exemptions: philosophical, religious, and medical. And we need to do a better job of making sure that those forms are easily accessible to all of our students and our parents, and knowing that they do have a choice, not just with this COVID vaccine, but with all vaccines. And so I will defend our kids in our district. So, no.
Thank you. Cassie?
So I agree. I won't support a mandate. I will not vote. That's the job of the state or the federal government. That's not the job of a school board member. A vaccine is something you put in your body. It's not something you can take on or take off like a mask. So that's not something I would ever be comfortable with. I was interested in this. I actually looked up in all the student handbooks. It's only actually listed in the kindergarten handbook, that where it points to the section of 3313.671 of the Ohio Revised Code is where it actually calls out the 3 exemptions. So one thing I would do, based on what Heidi was even saying, I would make sure that's in every handbook, because you get more than just kindergartners in our district. I would think, I don't know, I've never requested an exemption form, but I would think if you could go to the office at any building, you should be able to request that, or if it's at the Board of Education, I'm not really sure where those forms would be, but you should have access to them if you request them. It shouldn't necessarily be go search out this form. So I'd want to see them, if a parent goes to an office, say, can I have this form? They should have the form available to you, but I would not support a mandate.
Mike?
So publicly, as a school board member, I'm neither pro-vaccine nor anti-vaccine, but I am very much pro-family choice. So I'm going to echo a lot of what's been said here. And Cassie, I really appreciate you and Heidi's comments about making the exemptions, making people more aware of that. I think that, I don't know, if I were to put a number on it, 85% of incoming kindergarten parents are not aware of those exemptions. So I would like to see that basically any time vaccination is mentioned, whether it's in handbooks or it's on final forms, whatever the case may be, just a quick little blurb. 3313 Ohio Revised Code, there is an exemption available. As an educational institution, and I feel this way across all subjects, we should make all data available. We should make all information available. We should educate our parents so that they can make an informed choice. And unfortunately, I think that this situation is more precarious maybe than some may think. Cincinnati has already implemented a mandate that their teachers, their staff must be vaccinated. California, across the entire state, is mandating all public and private school students must be vaccinated. So Ohio is one of only 16 states that have a vaccine exemption, and I'm really grateful it's there. I'd make sure that people know about it, but it's precarious. So if something does come from the state or the federal government, or if for some reason that exemption tries to go away, I want to assure parents that I would be a voice in fighting for that right, even if it means putting a coalition together, talking to the media, going to Columbus, whatever the case may be. It's real easy to just say, well, I wouldn't vote for that at the local level, and it's the role of the state. I'd fight it at the state too.
Thank you. Okay, Kevin, this is yours. It's a 3-part question. Should the district follow health guidelines, and how would that be best done with changing guidelines? Do you think the school's current COVID approach has worked, and why? And what do you think federal COVID money should be spent on? Yeah.
Okay. All right, here we go. Off to the races. First question, because there are 3 of them.
That's fine. I can do it like
It's
that.
just like,
Should the district follow health guidelines, and how would that be best done as they change?
what I think is the government should do its job. Again, I'll use a rather strong word here. I'm incensed, is the word I would use, that the state government has tried to levy a responsibility on school districts throughout the state to basically follow recommendational guidance from the Ohio Department of Health and the Greene County Public Health, in our case, for we live here in Greene County. So it's an open question here. I mean, and it's one we struggle with. I struggle with trying to understand what is recommendational guidance. It's recommendations for masks. It's recommendations for vaccines. Well, why do we follow one or not the other? And so I'm quite troubled by that. To date, we have followed at the school, being on the school board. As you can see how we voted, we are, and you see how the school is administering itself. It is following the COVID quarantine protocols that are provided by the state and local. But you know, I'm not really sure I'm answering all 3 questions because it's kind of hard to answer this in 2 minutes here. What's the other 2 questions?
I'll give you the last one. What do you think the federal COVID money should be spent on?
We could look at HIPAA filters, and that's probably the most likely and valuable thing we could use it for, because anything else, the money's going to go away. I think we have $1.7 million, if I remember correctly. So we could use them for things that will help us to maintain, the science behind it maybe is not absolute, but anything is certainly going to help. And what was the other question?
Do you think the school's current COVID approach has worked, and why?
Yes, I do. And that's what I've supported to date, and with my vote. And again, and we've eliminated quarantines essentially for our K through 6ers, and I think that's a good thing. So, thank you. Sorry, it's hard
No,
to remember
you're
all the
fine. You're
questions,
fine. It was a big one, Josh.
All right, can we start one by one? Let's make
Yes.
that a thing.
We'll start with what do you think the federal COVID money should be spent on?
I think that's an easy one. So I think the first priority should be to do things that will mitigate risk in the school buildings. I think the HIPAA filters are a really good example of what could do that. I think after that, we should look at permissible expenses that can be used to support both COVID mitigation as well as ongoing operation of the school. I've heard an idea about replacing some of the aging Chromebooks as a way to use some of that money as well. And I think that would be a good expense, because not only does it help prepare us for the hopefully avoidable outcome of going remote or hybrid, but it also supports a maintenance need for the school that has been an ongoing budget concern. Next step?
Should the district follow health guidelines, and how would that be best done with the changing guidelines?
So yes, I think we should carefully observe and understand the CDC and Ohio Public Health guidelines and follow those as best as we can. I think that the fact that we learn new things every day is part of science, and that as those new guidelines change, we should be prepared to change our policy and our posture in order to meet the new information provided. Now, right now we're dealing with Delta. Next week we'd be dealing with Eta, and I hope we don't get to Zeta, but this is going to be a thing we're dealing with for a little while longer, and the more we can follow those protocols to get through it, I think the better. And the last one?
Do you think school's current COVID approach has worked, and why?
I think I'm hard-pressed to say whether the approach has worked. I think demonstrably it has worked, but the problem with these kinds of things is you never know if you've done enough. You've either done all the things and nothing happens, and then you look like you were paranoid, or you do absolutely nothing in the hope that you get through. There's a balance you have to strike. I think that a more proactive policy and a more pre-established policy could have done better, but I don't think we were doing badly.
Audra?
Regarding guidelines, in general, yes, we should follow guidelines. Our cafeterias should heat food to the recommended temperatures, and there's been guidelines, we follow them all the time. When it comes down to COVID specifically, we've seen agencies that have the power to make rules, and as Kevin said, abdicate that responsibility. And so if someone is going to put that responsibility on me, I'm going to take those recommendations, but not just take them and blindly follow them. I'm going to make an informed decision. If it's going to be my decision, my vote, I'm going to make it an informed one, and it will consider those guidelines, but I will not take them blindly. Have policies worked to date? I am incredibly proud of the board. The board prior to my arrival, I'm not taking credit for this at all, did fabulously last year, and we were, I would say, tops in the entire state for the number of days our children were present in our school buildings. And that was a risk. That was the gamble. Bellbrook leaned forward and did wonderfully. I could not be more proud when I talk to people that I know from the military around the country that talk about their kids going back to school for the first time just in the last month. And our kids were in school all year long, and that's amazing. This year, it has admittedly been more challenging. I don't think we'll know. I think there's a good chance that we might find out, hey, we didn't do quite enough, but I think there's an even bigger chance that we're going to look back on this and say, what were we doing? We did way too much. Why did we do this to our kids? And so I am wary of that. Regarding COVID funds.
The federal COVID money, how should it be spent?
Yeah. That's not as much as it sounds when you have a budget of, in the mid $30 million. And I think a lot of that is going to be kind of already spent in terms of dealing with COVID, the number of extra subs, extra supplies, and it's going to largely take care of itself. Anything left should be helping kids recover from the academic challenges that they face because of COVID.
Okay, thank you. The clock, can we reset that? It was negative. You're fine. Keith?
I was looking at that, it was going the wrong way.
Yeah.
I think we should try to follow health guidelines. I think that's our obligation, as the state indicates that we're in loco parentis when the kids come to school. But I think we've got to look at that, how that impacts our local community, and all communities are different. And they make rulings from the state or from the federal government that may be quite different for how we should conduct ourselves locally. So, but I think in general, should we follow health guidelines? Absolutely. We have an obligation to keep kids' health and safety in mind. Has our COVID approach at work? I don't know. I don't have the data to know that. I'm not in a position to know that. I hope it has. We've kept kids in school. That's a good thing. That's a good sign. We want to keep doing that. As far as the federal monies, I do think, even though it seems like a small amount of money, I think we owe it to the kids to look at, and the staff, to look at lowering elementary class sizes. I think it has had an impact on those kids, and those class sizes could be lowered with those monies. More tutoring could be provided for those who lost out last year and are losing out this year. And the HEPA filters, there's an example recently cited where they bought specific HEPA filters, I won't cite the brand name, that they're using them in a school district. I think they're like $2,000 a pop for a classroom, and they have had 0 COVID cases for the school year because they believe because they put these filters in every classroom. So I think that's certainly something we should look at.
Heidi?
Do I think that our guidelines, do we have to follow those? I think we need to make sure that we're differentiating between guidelines and mandates. I think that the board has taken a overly cautious position based on their legal counsel instead of based on what the county would actually do, because there seems to be a big disjointed conversation when you talk to a board member versus when you talk to the county, and I think that that has put the school district in a very unfair position. I do think that that we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to keep kids in school. However, we also had a superintendent that was saying in July, we're doing pre-COVID no matter what. People left the district because of it. People stayed in the district or came to the district because of it. And I think that there should have been more planning on that end at the beginning, kept the virtual option for people who didn't want to wear masks or for people who felt that their children were unsafe without a mask. I'm always about parent choice in everything. So I think that there could have been more done in there. But as far as the COVID money, I think that first of all, there's a lot of questions about what that money is tied to based on a frequently asked question page at the state level that came out for the ARP funds. So if we're going to have the money, I would want to make sure that it is spent on HEPA filters that can get COVID at the source. I think it's really a sad thing that we had a parent that went out and purchased them for her child's classrooms instead of our district doing it. That's our job, not her job. And I do think that in this entire thing, we are ignoring the academic slide of our kids. We can protect their physical health, but nobody's addressing the academic slide that every child in Ohio has now experienced. And I think we need to take the money and address that.
Cassie?
I absolutely think we should be following the state guidelines, but I recognize that we need to be looking at it at a county or local level. Unfortunately, the state's website actually does a terrible job of breaking data down into a zip code level that you can actually act on. They give you a 2-week running number that doesn't actually give you daily trends. It takes a lot of effort to actually pull that data out. So unfortunately, we're kind of limited by what the state provides, and you actually have to use the county information. Based on that, though, if information changes, I said 100 cases per 100,000 for my masking stance. If we learn new data, I would change the policy. It's not static. That's the beauty of if you're on the board, you can change the policy as you go. I do think the board took a little bit too long to address COVID at the beginning of the year. We had parents on both sides of the fence, very emotional for the first several weeks. I think that was terrible to actually put the community through. We should have been proactive and had a policy in place so we didn't drive the wedge in this community even farther. Parents were also surveyed and no action was taken on that survey. Why are we being asked our opinion if nothing's going to happen from it? That was 4 or 5 weeks ago, and there's still been no resolution based on the parents' concerns, which actually supported a K-12 mask mandate. COVID money, I would absolutely buy HEPA filters, especially in the K-5 buildings. They're much closer, larger class sizes. There are far too many kids crammed into one classroom, and those are the kids that don't have the option to get a vaccine, so germs are just spreading. I would also actually like to build outdoor teaching spaces. I would like to have picnic tables. I would like to have a pavilion or something that you can take a kid outside on a nice day, have a board that you can still actually teach to, have a chalkboard, marker board, something, have a nice place for them to eat outside when it's nice weather. Give more options to get them out of the classroom, because you can utilize that after COVID is actually gone and have a different type of hands-on teaching experience.
Thank you. Mike?
I think an outdoor educational setting is an excellent idea. That's a great idea. Anything we can do to get kids outside is a great idea. I'll try to go piece by piece here. Should we follow COVID guidelines? We should absolutely take under advisement every guideline, every expert opinion, but keeping in mind in doing what's best for our community. What's right for downtown Columbus or Youngstown may not be right for Bellbrook, Sugar Creek. So, it's incumbent upon a board member to weigh all of the data and all the recommendations and truly do what's right for our community. What should money be spent on? I echo many things here, so I won't repeat it. But I would definitely like to see money in planning, which, by the way, it's about $1.9 million over a budget in the mid $30 million, about $1.9 million. But I would definitely like to see that money earmarked for addressing the academic challenges of the last 2 years. I keep hearing over and over from individual teachers who I do talk to that they're seeing second graders, and not just individuals, but like an entire class, having the behavior of kindergartners. I'm hearing a lot about students falling behind in regards to phonics and reading, and it's absolutely not because of our teachers, who are doing a fantastic job and are under so much pressure. It's just due to the climate that we've put ourselves in over the last 2 years. I've spent a lot of time in the last couple weeks. The board was recently given like the 5-year strategic plan and some documents, and I reviewed our mission statement and I reviewed our top objectives. And you know what I didn't find anywhere in there was anything about our teachers being a county health inspector or a contact tracing expert. And I feel terrible that they're spending, we've heard, 6 to 8 hours per case. We need to get back to making sure that education's our number one priority.
Thank you. Sarah?
I gotta remember all of them. What was it?
Should the district follow health guidelines, and how would that be best done with the changes? Do you think the school's current COVID approach has worked, and why?
Okay.
And what do you think the COVID federal money should be?
Okay, I think I got it all. I do think that we should be following health guidelines. I would have preferred that public health experts were able to make those kinds of mandates so that we were not put in that position, because last I checked, I don't believe anyone on the board or running is a public health expert. So I would prefer to have experts making those decisions, so I think we should be following the guidelines from the experts. I also would have preferred that we had a more proactive approach to COVID in the beginning. I believe I started emailing the board in July. And I think I got a lot of, no, everything's going to be normal, everything's going to be normal. And obviously that was not the case. There are a lot of things we could have done differently if we'd been a lot more proactive, that we could have had a lot of different things in place. I agree with Heidi that a virtual option should have been kept on the table, even though I did it last year and it was not my favorite. So maybe we could pick a different one of those. And then as far as the COVID funds, I agree with, there's a lot of good answers that everybody's already given, so I'm not going to repeat them. But I do know that we have a district to the north of us in Fairborn that has taken their funds and they have hired additional teachers on a specific short-term contract. Now, elementary school kids ideally need 18 to 20 kids to be optimal in a classroom, and I know that we are not anywhere near that. And since we have a lot of kids in the younger grades that are struggling, my son included, it would be helpful if we could hire maybe short-term teachers that could give more individualized attention to our younger children so that they could get caught up after a year of backslide.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to start with Josh with question 7. How do you define critical race theory? Give examples, and do you think it should be taught in K through 12 classes?
Okay, that's a 10-minute question in a 2-minute time span. So critical race theory, a fairly large, complex discussion of different viewpoints about the history of black and racial issues in this country. Not something that should be taught in a K through 12 curriculum, and I don't believe it is currently being taught in our K through 12 curriculum. And I would not support it being taught in our K through 12 curriculum. And since they kind of put that as the basis of the question, I think I can stop there. But we'll go a little bit further and say, there are efforts being made in the school right now that follow a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And I want to take the time to separate those concepts from CRT. Diversity is just the concept of having multiple viewpoints and aspects and cultures be part of the conversation. And that can be done by a number of things, including adding books to the library, including different perspectives and reading assignments as part of the English classes. Having a diverse teaching staff so that the kids can see themselves in the people that are teaching them. Those things are all important. Equity is about just realizing that different kids need different things to have the same educational successes. That comes in the form of special needs, that comes in the form of kids that are lower income and need some help in the lunches in order to be able to adequately have a good learning environment in the schools. And that might involve some racial considerations as well. And then inclusion is just the concept that every kid who enters our halls should feel like they are comfortable and welcomed in those halls. And I think that we have some work to do in those areas. And I think we all, as a nation, have work to do in those areas, but I don't think that they should be heavily divisive topics. So that's my conclusion.
Okay. Audra?
Okay, I want to hit the question first of all, because I think should critical race theory be taught in our schools is a very easy question to answer. It's a college level theory, then no, we should not be teaching it in a K through 12 environment. I think the question really should be, should the tenets of critical race theory be implemented in our schools? And that's a more challenging question, I think, for a lot of people to answer. My answer would be largely no. There might be little bits and pieces in there about teaching people to, based on a historically accurate curriculum, I think is important, and allowing our teachers to present history as it happened is important. But I think a lot of what is part of that theory and what people would define as that theory focuses a lot more on what makes us different than what makes us the same. I think kids naturally don't much care about that, and we need to be very careful that we aren't driving them to care more about their differences than their commonalities. And I think in general, I think focusing on things like racial labels are can be really destructive. I value diversity. I think diversity is a great thing to have in our schools, but trying to force diversity into our obviously population or even our staff is not something that you can do without implementing some version of racism or racial bias in itself. So no, I am not in favor of teaching critical race theory, nor am I in favor of implementing its major tenets in our school district.
Okay, thank you. Keith?
Well, critical race theory, as I read a little bit about it, came from the 1980s out of Harvard. There was a professor that brought that theory forth, and I'm a no for having that be part of the K-12 curriculum. I think it's best taught at the graduate level. That's where I learned a lot of theories and was asked to study theories, and we could, have a rather rigorous discourse about that at that level. I think that's inappropriate to do that at a K-12 level. I think we need to provide a more diverse learning, activities, a more diverse learning discussions, so that all students are involved in learning and have their needs met, and make that be age appropriate. And this is not one that is.
Okay, thank you. Heidi?
It's a no from me. CRT is, I think because of the political divisiveness of it behind it, people are very afraid of it. I would support constantly checking our curriculum and making sure that there are no nuances of it, because I know that a lot of it has been accepted in mainstream curriculum that we purchase, and I would want to make sure that all curriculum is free from political bias. I think most of the teachers do a pretty good job of keeping their political biases out, and the function of a classroom as an educator, myself, is my philosophy was always, if the kids knew my political standing, then I was failing as their teacher. It is as a teacher and a district, it is our job to make sure that we teach kids how to think and not what to think. So if we're crossing that line, then there's a problem. So I would want to make sure that we're keeping those tenets out of our classroom as much as possible, because the kids are going to be inundated with that enough as it is, and they don't need to be taught differences. We need to appreciate that there are differences, but the focus on labels, and there was such a push to get away from labeling kids, and now I feel like we're pushing back to do that again. And I think we just need to make sure that we have an environment that hard topics can be discussed, and but that kids are not indoctrinated. And I think that's the thing that most people are afraid of, is that teachers are indoctrinating kids, and I would make sure that we currently have board policy that forbids that. But we also need to understand that our country has a beautiful history that is full of pain. It's full of things that are not the easiest to discuss. And so I would want to make sure that our teachers are free to discuss that, and we are not micromanaging their classrooms. However, if there's a concern that is brought up and addressed, and I kind of have a problem grouping the special ed part in there, the DEI policies. That's part of the strategic plan, and I think we need to make sure that we are focusing again on these educational concepts, but CRT is a no from me.
Okay. Cassie?
CRT is also a no for me. I actually had to do a little bit of research into what exactly CRT was and where it was and was not being taught. It's absolutely not being taught in our schools, to best of my knowledge. It is a college level course. From what Keith just said, it sounds like it's actually a graduate level course. I'm not really sure where it's taught at the college level, but if a student is doing post-secondary education, I don't know that we can actually stop them from taking it if they qualify to take the class. So that would be my caveat, is if someone meets the requirements and they're doing post-secondary education, I can't physically stop them, but it would not be part of the curriculum in the K through 12 setting. I do want to mention, though, that I was poking around on the district website, and when you go to click on curriculum, it requires a username and password to actually even see the curriculum. I think that needs to change. I think all parents in the community should actually have access to be able to view what the actual curriculum is that's being taught to our children. So I do not have 100% assurances because I can't look at it myself, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not being taught, and I would not advocate for CRT being taught in our schools.
Mike?
So this is a topic that I've done a lot of research on. I read a lot, much to my wife's chagrin when she's trying to go to sleep and my headlamp's keeping her awake next door. I've read the original critical race theory textbook that came out in the late 80s. I've read White Fragility, White Rage, Dr. Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and others. I wanted to make sure that I went straight to the horse's mouth on this topic and did not just rely on hearing what other people had to say about it, because there can always be a political bias there. So what is critical race theory is that it is a college level graduate course. Basically, if I'm trying to summarize it in as few words as possible, again, straight from the horse's mouth, you must use a lens of race to look at all systems in our society. All systems in our society are tinged with racism in some way. I disagree with that worldview. I think that certainly racist policies can exist, And if they exist in our schools, I will be the first one going and seeking them out, or when anybody brings a policy, manual, curriculum to me, I'll be the first to nullify it. So critical race theory as a college level course cannot be taught in K through 12, but we really do need to be careful and be ever vigilant that some of the tenets of critical race theory are not appropriate for our schools, such as no student should ever be taught to feel shame because of their skin color. No student should ever feel taught to feel guilt for the actions of somebody else who happens to have the same skin color. At the same time, all fact from our history, no matter how uncomfortable or how shameful, needs to be on the table. But this is a really serious topic, and I think it's going to be very applicable in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Okay, to repeat everybody else. No, I do not support critical race theory being taught in K through 12. It's not something that I think we are currently teaching. I believe, just to say something different, go a little bit further, is to say that I don't think that politicians should necessarily be dictating what we are teaching at the local level here in our district. I'm not a huge fan of blanket bills that are in order to ban such things that they deem as critical race theory. So I would like to see more of that being like a local decision by our local school board in our community to decide what we're teaching in our curriculum with our teachers and giving them the freedom to do that themselves.
Sure, I'll do the same thing again. What's the question?
You're fine. Yeah. How do you define critical race theory? Give examples, and do you think it should be taught in K through 12 classes?
Okay, with respect to critical race theory, I've done a good bit of research on it, and I just pulled a couple bullets kind of anticipating this question here tonight. And critical race theory has made up of 6 broadly accepted tenets, and I'll read just a couple of them. That says race is socially constructed, not biologically natural, and that racism in the United States is normal, not aberrational. It's the ordinary experience of most people of color. So I think those are a couple tenets that fairly understandable. That said, I do not believe at all that CRT is being taught in our schools. I have no concern about that. Likewise, though, I also do not think that our history is being whitewashed by Bellbrook teachers either. I think they do a good job of presenting our history, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. That'd be 3 things instead of 2, I guess, when I said both. But anyhow, that said, you see elements of CRT creeping in. For example, the 1619 project is a validated, recognized resource as a social studies resource on the Ohio Department of Education's website. And it teaches things such as the United States began in 1619, that the Revolutionary War, one of the primary reasons we fought it was to the preservation of slavery. And it opens up with these words. Our founding ideals of liberty and equality were false when they were written. So no, I don't accept that. And I would stiff arm any effort by the state to put that into our school district. That said, being a board member, recently on 2 occasions we have projected our board policy on controversial issues. And I'll read just briefly here in my 20 seconds that are left. We will permit the introduction of proper educational use of controversial issues as long as it does not tend to indoctrinate or persuade students to a particular point of view, and it encourages open-mindedness and is conducted in a spirit of scholarly inquiry. So certainly we will teach our history truthful, but no to any type of indoctrination. And again, there's some concern of that even we see from our own state level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Audra, question 8, a more local Bellbrook question. Do you support busing being brought back, and how would you do that?
Cool. Okay. I should defer to the expert on this topic here, so in front of me, but this is a hard one, and it shouldn't be. Yes, I'm a family who is not currently, but will be impacted very shortly by busing cuts. We will obviously not have busing as my children are approaching that high school age. We are lucky to have busing now. I really want to bring busing back, and I am willing to, as a current board member, to bring some level of busing back. That said, and I appreciate Cassie's efforts to really gauge the opinion of the community on that. That said, I bet if I circulated a petition that said, do you want smaller class sizes, I would get a bunch of signatures. Do you want to bring art back? I would get a bunch of signatures. Do you want to restore these 20 extracurriculars to our high school? I would also get a bunch of signatures. we are fiscally constrained, and we need to keep that in mind. So where there is big bang for the buck as far as where we can service children without a ton of additional dollar creep, we absolutely should. And we should prioritize students who have dangerous pathways to school, our younger students who cannot, even if they live nearby, should not be walking to school alone, and then our high school students who do live far from the high school. That's where I would prioritize that money. So yes, I am in favor of restoring some measure of busing, but we have to keep a tight watch on the pocketbook.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I certainly support busing coming back. I know it's been a hardship for parents, and that's one of the disappointing things that occurred because of the levy failures. And as a result, once you cut busing and you lose bus drivers, it's difficult to get them back because there are so many schools looking for bus drivers, and we had natural occurrences with retirements as well and the COVID as well. So I think first you need to look at getting more bus drivers. We need to look at our busing fleet. It's aging, and we don't seem to have a plan to purchase buses, so we don't want to put an unsafe aged fleet out there, although we have great mechanics, I know. We need to talk to them about what we need, how many buses we should order, because we do have the money to do that. And I think lastly, we should look at rerouting. What's it take to get this done? Do we look at K-5 routing as we did before? Do we look at 612 as we did before? Is there something we can do with the staff that's available and the buses that's available to make this happen? Changing times, whatever it takes, and it's going to take some time, unfortunately, because it got cut. It's not something that's going to be easy to be put back, but with the proper study and the proper work, it can be done, but it may take through the year and put in place next year.
Thank you. Heidi?
I do absolutely support busing coming back. I think that I believe that this cut, when it was cut, it was a punitive cut. That's my viewpoint. The community, a lot of community members share that. It was done strictly to force the hand of a yes vote. I agree with that, and I think it was pretty, I find it very disturbing that a parent had to go and collect over 300 signatures on her own when we already know that this busing is extremely important to this district. We went from having everyone bused to nobody bused, very few bused. And she didn't need to put in all that effort. That's not her job. I'm thankful that she did it, but it wasn't her job. And then to not act upon that is even more distressing. So I believe that you know, the first thing when the levy passed, the first thing that was done was a teacher raise. The teachers are absolutely worth the money that we spend on them. However, we have young children walking to school without a sidewalk in the dark. The school passed the levy as an SOS, Save Our Schools. And to me, busing is a non-negotiable because it means kids not getting hit on feed wire, not getting hit on Upper Bellbrook Road. It's not safe to have kids walking in this district. So we need to do whatever we can to make that happen and make that a priority. And the money that we get from the levy should be going to the students and making sure that they have a safe way to school. So that would be one of my priorities as a board member, is to make sure that we get that in there. I know there's interesting talk from the governor having the National Guard come in and help busing. I don't know how that would work. But whatever we need to do it, and we need to do it fast because it's only a matter of time before a child gets hurt. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Hey, Cassie?
2 minutes is so not enough on this topic.
They can donate minutes to you.
So,
You can have my 2 minutes.
as several others alluded to, I am the one that went around and collected over 300 signatures to show community support. It wasn't just parent support. It was individuals that even voted no for the levy that said, yes, busing should absolutely be reinstated. This is something that our community needs. Everyone's fed up with the traffic. Everyone recognizes that it's an unsafe situation for the students to be walking to school. This is a non-walkable community in many areas. We have no sidewalks, no crosswalks, no street lights. It's not safe. Interesting enough, because of how everything was changed around, and Keith alluded to it, The K through 5 busing that we once had would actually allow us to bring back busing relatively quickly. For the Stephen Bell route, we have 9 buses that are not actually being utilized at this time. So I know it might not be a popular opinion to move BCI back to the same time as Stephen Bell, but that would actually be a very easy win. We have the drivers. I believe it's either 18 or 19 drivers that we currently have that operate the BCI and middle school route. If you move BCI back to the same schedule as Stephen Bell, you have those drivers. It would be an additional hour to hour and a half a week that each of those drivers would be operating. Current bus driver salaries hourly wage is between $17 and $18 an hour. You multiply that by 180 days. It's not that big of a price tag. The actual price tag that Dr. Kozad told me earlier in the year was we were saving $250,000 a year. We're projected to have just shy of $11.7 million surplus in 2025. I find it more than reasonable to try and find a way to spend $250,000 a year to bring back additional busing, not necessarily to the level that we had in the community before it was cut, but we can definitely do a better job than what we do now. An actual board policy states, at least for grades K through 8, the exclusion zone should be no more than 1 mile. Right now, that's out to almost 2 miles. So we're in violation of the board policy. This needs changed, and I do have several plans on how to update this. I'm out of time.
Mike?
So the community has blessed us with money with the last levy after hard battles. So we absolutely need to be good stewards of that. We need to always have fiscal responsibility and our budget at the forefront to make sure that we're not asking for additional sacrifices from our taxpayers. But with that being said, I'm a very firm yes in that I support bringing back at least some restoration of busing. I was actually going to bring up the numbers Cassie just did, is that I asked our administration a while back what we're saving in by having those cuts that were instituted a couple years ago. It's about $250,000 a year. Just to throw another number to kind of put that into perspective, $250,000 a year is that one of the proudest votes that I've made as a new board member, it was right when I first came on board, was to approve a renegotiation of health benefits for the teachers. And by all accounts is a win-win. The teachers loved it, the union approved it and loved it, and the district loves it because it saves us about $4.3 million. So when there's large fruit that can be picked from a tree like that, and then we're talking about $250,000 for all of busing, and I support just bringing back some busing, especially for students who don't have a safe avenue to walk. I think that something can be done there. And I'll finish up by saying that there's been a lot of discussion on this, rightfully so, but there's been a lot of talk, whether it be from the podium, from the community, or from the board, about how to micromanage and maybe suggestions of this or time schedules or new routes, whatever. We have a great transportation director and a great department that does that. So it's not our job to micromanage how to do it. But at the very last board meeting, because I was kind of sick of just all the talk, I asked the administration if they could please provide a timeline and what milestones. Let's put some stakes in the ground. It's not our job to figure out all the nuts and bolts, but let me know what the challenges are and when they will be solved. So I look forward to hearing that tomorrow night.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think it's very unfair to go last after Cassie, but
I think Josh is last.
oh well. Going after her at all on this topic is really not fair. Okay. Personally, my family is not directly affected by this except for the ridiculous traffic that I sit in every single day trying to drop off my child to school, at the preschool, trying to pick them up when BCI is being let out like 10 minutes before. I know that there's probably a lot of things that we could look at to try to relieve some of the congestion that doesn't necessarily involve bringing back all of busing. I do support bringing back some level of busing. And I have talked to Cassie. She has done way more research than I have. So she has a lot of different plans, a lot of different ideas. She's talked to everybody about it. And I think that we are blessed to have her in our community to have done all that legwork to help us. So I want us to be as financially responsible as possible and to make the best decisions for the community as a whole. And I believe that that does involve bringing back some level of busing, because a lot of the areas, I live fairly close to the majority of the schools, and it is still not always optimal for young children to be walking by themselves. So yes is the answer.
Kevin?
For those of you, again, I'm a current sitting board member. Anyone that has watched board members since May would have heard me repeatedly calling for just this thing we talked about tonight. I am immensely concerned about the safety of our children coming to school, and also the inconveniences to the parents that are having to run kids among 3 schools at incompatible times for pickups and things like that. So again, if you watched our YouTube Emmy quality level recordings, maybe you heard me make those comments, but if you haven't heard it until now, you can hear it, that this is an extreme passion of mine. I've also been very concerned and worked diligently on crosswalk safety. We currently have, I'm not sure if it was from my nudging from last year or not, but we do have some adults that are now crossing guards on feed wire in Upper Bellbrook. But yet, we still need to get the busing restored. As was mentioned, in 2025, we're looking at around $11.8 million projected in our cash surplus. And even if we went back to the high level of busing, which we won't, that would be over 4 years from now, that would be $1 million out of the $11.8 million. So it's inconsequential in terms of the amount. So this has to happen, and I don't want to wait till next year. No. Again, I've been chomping at the bits. I've expressed it as passionately and as I possibly could have in the school board meetings. And when statements have been made at the school board meetings, I have supported the statements that were made and done my best. I'm only one sitting board member. It is not my ability to implement this, but I can be a loud and obnoxious voice to make it happen. I would like to see the busing come back as early as in January, with special focus on high school students and those kids that live south of 725, close to Stephen Bell, but there are no crosswalks and there's no busing. And there's no sidewalks either. This has to change. It has my strongest support. I will absolutely vote for it as a board member if given the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh?
So, I mean, I said at the beginning of this, I tend to be a fiscal conservative. I think this is a trade-off between having a decent amount of money to work with and a promise that was made to the community about stretching that budget as long as possible. And I think it is going to be a trade-off. Do we want to have full busing in this district? I think every person on this stage will say yes, we want that. The question is what can we agree as a community is an appropriate amount to pay for what amount of busing, and what will that line look like? I believe a lot of the people up here have said we should bring back some level of busing. I think it's the responsible thing to do. There are sections of this town that are simply unwalkable. I would love to bring it all back. But I think what we should do is put together a proposal. We should outline, what amount of money we have, how long that projected budget is going to go, and lay it out to the community. Hey, if we bring back this proposed level of busing, we're talking about 6 months earlier till a levy because that's the way the numbers line up. Public comment. What do you guys feel about this? And I think that's proactive planning that needs to be done in a lot of different topics and in a lot of different places, is establish a proposal, get public comment, establish what the plan is going to be, get buy-in and consensus from the people who need to implement it, and then move out. As Keith mentioned, I think we're going to have a problem bringing back busing quickly because like a big cruise ship, you can't turn on a dime with some of these things. There's going to be a staffing problem, there's going to be a bus maintenance problem, and the need to potentially buy some new buses in order to account for aging fleet. But I think that it's a problem that should be focused on and that we can do more than we're doing now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, question 9, and we've cycled back to Keith. Why do you think diversity, equity, and inclusion is important in a school, and how do you plan on supporting and improving Bellbrook Sugar Creek's DEI situation?
Well, diversity, equity is important in any school, not just Bellbrook. We are a more diverse world and more diverse community than we were even 27 years ago when we moved here. And we have an obligation to our parents, our community, our kids to provide that diverse education for all kids, special needs, gifted. And I think we need to be looking at, I'm suggesting in one of my topics that we look at a school improvement plan as part of an action plan that would address issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, because there's work to be done. Staff should be involved with input on that. So should parents, administration and make a school improvement plan for each building so that it addresses the age-appropriate need, look at what we're teaching, what we're not teaching, what can we add, or what needs to be brought forth new, and looking for the future for kids, because we need to look at, we have a quality program, we have an excellent program, but we need to continue to step up to meet the needs. So I would see us working on school improvement plans in the schools as part of the action planning from the strategic plan.
Okay, thank you. Heidi?
I think that the DEI now has some pretty good support in the strategic plan. I think that there's a lot of people working on it, but I do want to speak to, because when I'm out meeting people and talking to people, part of the DEI plan involves our special needs kids. And I think that there's been a lot of good surface improvement to that, but I don't feel like it's been true change that needs to happen, that the parents want to happen. And I want to be very careful not to speak for them, because they are their own best advocates. But I feel like we have to do a better job with equity and inclusion. I feel like our special needs department is ignoring a lot of the things that need to happen that parents want. Parents should not have to fight for their kids to have an education, because the equal education is not equity. We need to make sure that we're providing those tools to students in order for them to achieve the same outcome as neurotypical children. And I believe that we can only do that if we include the parents on that. So I want to make sure that we are revising, complete revision top to bottom of our systems in place for IEPs and services that we provide, because a lot of times we as a school district are being paid for services that are never reaching the child. I know that that has been brought up repeatedly in conversations. So we need to make sure that we have an environment where all students, regardless of their background, their race, their gender preference, everyone feels that they are in a safe environment where they can learn and become the best version of themselves that they can be. And everybody should want that, and everybody should want to make sure that we keep the political divisiveness out of that piece and make sure that we are meeting the needs of every student.
Okay, thank you. Cassie?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion should be at the forefront of our educational system. We all have our own talents, and we should choose to help grow each individual's talents regardless of their background, wealth, or gender. As a district, we should strive to hire teachers and staff with a diverse background that allows all students to have a role model to look up to. Our curriculum should help us learn from our past in order to help strengthen our future. The world is ever changing, and we need to ensure that we are changing with it. We need to ensure all voices are heard, and our assignments and curriculum help our students connect with the material. We need to ensure we're making sure all students have a fair opportunity to grow and thrive within our educational system. Not everyone has the same strengths or weaknesses, but we must recognize and focus our efforts for each unique individual. We should not solely rely on test scores to identify a child's ability. We need to recognize that there is more to academics than what a standardized test tells you about an individual. We need to ensure that everyone has access to the tools they need to succeed. We need to ensure all children have transportation to school. I will strive to improve any equity concerns with the special needs programs, as I know this has been a concern for many years. I have not been as involved with any of that. That was all before I really moved here, but I would want to address the concerns that Heidi has addressed on that as well. My goal is to ensure every child in our community has the tools they need to succeed no matter their background. We need to be able to focus on learning, and I'll help remove any roadblocks to the learning process that I can. We should not be segregating anyone based on their differences. It's important to embrace differences and work to remove artificial barriers that impede inclusion. Any special needs children that can and should be in the classroom with their peers, we should make sure that's happening. As also happening on the school buses, as we do segregate the special needs children from their peers, including their siblings. If elected, my goal would be to ensure all students feel a sense of belonging to our district and that they're able to find a role model and someone that they can see as a bit of themselves in. I'll work to remove equity obstacles and remove inclusion barriers. I'll strive to make school a safe space for students to express themselves by fostering an environment that embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Mike, you're up.
I think DEI is a very important topic, and I agree with much, if not all, of what was said before me. I'll try to find something to add in that, diversity and inclusion is a strength not only of our school, but of our society. we need diversity of thought and diversity of life experience. It's only having all of those voices being involved in the conversation that we can really sift through and distinguish the good ideas from the bad. I know that we were very quickly presented with the 5-year strategic plan. We were supposed to have an entire board meeting about that, but it kind of got overtaken with COVID. Quick aside, if I can chase a rabbit, I think I'm ready to maybe propose that we have one COVID meeting where we could talk about COVID, and then I don't care if we double the number of meetings, that's fine. 3 days later, we can have a meeting where we don't talk about COVID. And let's really dig into the curriculum. Let's dig into the strategic plan. Because I want to hear a lot more about that one slide on equity that we heard. I'm excited to hear about it. We need to engage folks in our community that are very knowledgeable in this area. I was blessed to have a long coffee chat with some members of Sugar Creek Cares. I'd like to continue doing that. But diversity and equality, inclusion, it needs to be our strength. We're all created equal. We all need to have an equal opportunity to flourish in our schools.
Okay, thank you. Sarah.
My turn. Okay. I think we should start probably by having like a DEI statement. I think that that's probably long overdue, that we don't have that in our strategic plan right now. I know we have peer districts around us that we typically compete with, like Oakwood and Centerville, that already have that included. So I would like to see Bellbrook, step up and have that also. To me, we need to be including, a range of perspectives and experiences into our curriculum so that our students can compete and be comfortable well beyond Bellbrook Sugar Creek, because our world is ever increasing in diversity. A lot of things I agree with. I think that other people have said. Heidi's very correct with our special needs students. I have been blessed to have experiences with the early intervention program with my child, and I know how life-changing some of those experiences can be. The therapies and the help that my son has received really were night and day. So to the child that he was before he came to Bellbrook. I know we have a very fierce advocate special needs parent group that has been advocating for change. I know that we have made a lot of changes, and I know that we have a lot of work to do still, and I would like to see that happen. As well as Mike mentioned, Sugar Creek Cares is a group of amazing people, and they have a lot of good ideas that we should be listening to.
Thank you. Kevin?
I'm fully committed to the principles and practice of diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity in the Bellbrook Sugar Creek school system. And I need to read this because I can't remember this verbatim, but with respect to equity, I hold to it as defined by the Ohio Department of Education's website. It says, each child has access to relevant and challenging academic experiences and educational resources necessary for success across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, family background, and/or income. And so I'll continuously work to ensure that no policy or practice within the district will result in unfair treatment or diminished opportunity for any student or employee. So indeed, we need to, as was mentioned, we need to revisit and focus on the 5-year strategic plan that, again, we saw just before the board meeting a month ago or so. I can't remember, but we need to be, as board members, more involved in that, and certainly make sure it accommodates these concerns. I mean, indeed, we are better, stronger when we have diversity and equity. And again, as you know, I was military for 29 years, so that's been my norm. The military is a model for diversity and inclusion. You know, it was when I went to pilot training, it was my pilot training class when the first woman raised her hand. She finished number 1 in her pilot training class and said, "I want that at fighter jet." And they said, "Hey, Air Force policy prevents that this currently." Long story short, Secretary of the Air Force got involved, and she became a fighter pilot, and she's a 2-star general that I'm actually going to get to talk to here in a couple weeks, so on a different subject. But my point being, it's what I know: diversity, inclusion, equality, and then recourses for concern if you encounter that. So, amen, I'm behind this, and I met with Sugar Creek Cares, a person representative of that, and enjoyed the conversation and actually came away better for it. Certainly learned something, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Josh?
So I certainly agree with everything that's been said by my fellow candidates on the table here. To add a little bit, I think that we've talked a lot about special needs as a portion of the DEI umbrella. And I think it's important to recognize that different portions of DEI are in different places. With special needs right now, there's a strong advocacy group, and they're doing a lot of really good work. And I don't want to overshadow the work that's being done by that particular group with ongoing efforts that may need to be done in other areas to improve. Being a fan of data-driven policies, I think that we need to measure where we are as a school district and understand meaningful metrics on what it means to be a DEI district. Does that mean that a certain percentage of our library books should include alternative viewpoints and other cultures? I think that's a good thing to shoot for. Does it mean that a certain percentage of the books that we review in English class should include POC authors and perspectives? I think that's a good thing to shoot for. So I think it would be beneficial to work with groups like Sugar Creek Cares and work with the district to identify where we are at currently, what things specifically we want to change, present that as a proposal again, get consensus and community buy-in amongst the staff and the parents so that everyone knows what's going on, and then make those changes and reevaluate. So I agree with everything that's been said to date, but just a little more flavor on the sort of the implementation side of things.
Audra?
This going last is horrible.
I'm sorry.
No, I will say throughout my campaign, I've talked a lot about not just being on Facebook and not living my life on Facebook and sitting down for conversations. So I recently as last week, sat down with some of our community's probably loudest voices regarding this topic. And I learned a lot. We agreed on a lot. We found we agreed on well more than we disagreed on. And I got some great ideas on how to do make some really easy changes, like incorporating more diverse literature that you mentioned, or characters in that literature. We talked a lot about bringing more diversity as far as our staff in, and I'm struggling with that a little bit because, like Kevin said, I work for the government. It's a melting pot, but I have seen efforts there, I will call it forced diversity. And I've seen them implemented badly, and it ended up being a negative for all involved, for those in the minority groups as well as those in the majority. It fostered some bad feelings, and I think that's something to be very careful about. I also agree with Mike. He brought up things like diversity of thought should also be included, backgrounds, economic background, physical ability, intellectual ability, and focusing on doing it in an age-appropriate manner. I think a lot of times we try to teach our children about things that maybe they haven't been exposed to, and that's okay when you're a little kid. And parents do need to get some say in when they're going to expose big worldviews to their children. But I will say, although we don't have a lot of formal statements or things in our strategic plan, I don't think we do a bad job on this either. If you go sit at a football game or look at our playground, you'll see our minority students completely integrated with their peers, and it's actually a really beautiful thing to watch. So I would invite you all to do that, because that's kind of my metric there, my gauge.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Heidi, what is your stance on supporting LGBTQ students and policies that pertain to them in the school?
I believe that all kids, no matter what they identify as, should feel welcome and safe in our district. As far as integrating things like that, into concepts like that into our curriculum and things like that, I believe there's things that we need to be very cognizant that kids come to us with their own set of values, their own belief systems that are being instilled into their parents. So we need to tread lightly on those types of topics being included in our curriculum, accessible in the library, those kind of issues. But I think that all students need to feel welcome no matter who they are, because we are educating a total person, and that's where I stand on that.
Cassie?
Can you repeat it again?
Excuse me. What is your stance on supporting LGBTQ students and policies that pertain to them in the school?
So, I completely support a child wanting to become the truest version of themselves. Anything that we can do to make them feel accepted in who they believe that they are destined to be. I am concerned that I've already heard some statements of children being looked down upon or say, you look like a they, them. We should be making sure that that's not okay for students to be treating others that way, because it's not something to be frowned upon. It's something that if a child identifies, if that's the pronouns that they choose, we should be accepting of that and making sure that other children are accepting of that as well. I know this is a new thing that's becoming more prevalent in our community as children are much more aware of themselves, it seems, these days, or it's more socially acceptable than it used to be. And we need to make sure that as a community, we are growing and changing with the dynamic in our own community. I think I addressed it all.
You're good. Mike?
So if I've annoyed you by knocking on one of the hundreds of doors, apologize for that, but I handed you a little card that explains some of my values. And one of them on that card is that I believe every child needs an advocate. And I really do mean that. Every child needs an advocate. So whatever we can do to support individuals and make them feel welcome and safe in their schools, we need to do. I honestly don't know what to say on top of that. Whatever we can do to be an advocate for every child, I'm in favor of.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
That's a pretty short and sweet answer. I think the same thing. It really is that all students should be actively included and supported in our schools. I'm 100% behind any policies that would support and make our children feel included and able to receive the best education that they can regardless.
Okay, Kevin?
Yes. My gosh, absolutely. How can we not, accept our children as they are? I really don't have a lot to say. It's just to me self-evident that we would do that we would, respect our children and their perspectives on life, and and warmly embrace them and welcome that type of diversity, that comes into this discussion. So, yes, fully support them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Josh?
So, I think there's a lot of newness in the concepts of identity that we've been wrestling with or discovering in our communities over the last many years. That I hear stories where kids are treated differently because of their identities or how they choose to present. That distresses me. But again, I come down to a perspective of measurement and proposal and follow through. I think that any report of someone being mistreated for who they are should be addressed. And if it exists even once in our schools, then we should be doing a greater effort and making a greater effort to do some social emotional learning on what is acceptable in our society today and what is not. That moves a little bit into some curriculum and kind of teaching kids to be accepting of other individuals and their identities and presentations. And I think that's okay, but I agree with others who have stated that it's not something that should be a learning point or something specific in the curriculum.
Audra?
I guess I would advocate for addressing these differences like I would for any other difference, whether that's someone in a racial or cultural minority, a child that has special needs or a disability. We should expect the same for children in this community as well. When it comes to things like including this in our curriculum, like you just brought up, I think that we do need to focus on age appropriateness and recognize that this is an area that is somewhat different than race, in that different families do hold different religious views and personal opinions on this, but this is something our kids are going to need to address as they and face in the world. So it's something our kids need to learn about, be familiar with, learn to respect, and but we do really need to focus on the age appropriateness when we start bringing it into that curriculum area, because families are all tackling this a little bit differently.
Okay. Thank you. Keith?
Well, we should support all students and professionally recognize that they are treated as any student, cared for, that they're safe, that there's no mistreatment, that there's no difference sorting out would be acceptable. All kids should be treated equally and receive an equal educational opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. Cassie, how would you improve community-school relations and increase direct communication between the community members and the board members?
Well, I would actually push for 4 sets of panel discussions throughout the year. 2 specifically for the teachers to bring their concerns and 2 specifically for the community to bring their concerns. I'm not satisfied with the current community chat idea that's being presented and supposed to happen next week. I believe we should have specific meetings when teachers, building administrators, and the community can bring their questions and concerns to the board. They should be able to present their questions to the board directly and have an open dialogue with actual back and forth discussion. These panel type discussions should be set up once per quarter and become a regular part of our community interactions with the school board. I've been on the side of not feeling heard for far too long, and if elected, I would encourage my fellow board members to implement these panel discussions. I know next week there's supposed to be a community chat, and it looks like it's going to be each board member in a different room, and I find it extremely frustrating that the parents are being divided up based on which school their children attend. I have kids in multiple schools. I don't know which room my child should attend to get my concerns addressed. It doesn't sound like I can change rooms. It's very unclear with how this is being set up at this time. So we need an actual forum with all board members at the table where the community can actually come up and address the board, say, I have this question, let's have this back and forth.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, this is a topic I talk about a lot. While I think that our district has done a pretty good job at sort of one-way PR, we do a really good job. Dr. Kozad does a great job with the bridge. We do a good job maybe right before a levy of like, here's a flyer of a cute kid, please give us money. Putting out one-way information, we really can do a better job at having real, honest-to-goodness, two-way conversations. And I've tried to personify that. I know when I interviewed for my position on the board here in June, that was something that I talked a lot about, is how can we restore real, honest, two-way conversations. I talked a lot about having more town hall style Q&A sessions. Anybody who's come to a board meeting, we're super grateful that you're there to give your public comments, but you've seen that it's not very conducive to getting any answers. There's folks up there on a stage under spotlights, and you're back 20 yards away in a microphone, and if you ask questions, hopefully we can interact a little bit, but it's just not the time and place. So we really can do a better job. And again, I've tried to personify it like, before the campaign started, I wanted to make myself available. This sounds maybe too simple and too easy, but that's because it works. I make myself available, and I know other candidates do too, other board members, before every board meeting. You know, if you have an issue, or if you just want to meet me and come say hi, come tomorrow night. I'll be there about an hour early. I've had over 15 opportunities for in-person meetups, whether it's just something informal at Sackett Wright Park while I'm already there for my kids' baseball practice, or something much more formal like a meet and greet with a candidate or something else. So I pledge to continue fostering a culture where those types of simple, in-person, two-way communication opportunities can happen, because I think we've all witnessed that Facebook is not the way for that to happen. That spirals 99% of the time right down the drain, and we can't have that.
Thank you. Sarah?
I understand completely how frustrating it is to give a speech to a very silent board. I have done that more than once, and it really doesn't make you feel heard. It doesn't make you feel good. sometimes it makes you feel like you got to vent, but you didn't really feel like you made any kind of a progress in your actual concerns. So I do agree both with Mike and with Cassie that we do need some other form of communication with the board as a whole. The community chat that's going to be happening does have some difficulties and some problems with it, but I am glad to see something actually happening, because I believe that there have been many calls from the community for years to have better communication. And at least we are getting something at this point, but it does present a problem for parents that have multiple children in multiple buildings, or maybe not a building specific concern, and then depending on which board member that you're talking to, they're only one board member, and then they have to, I don't know what's going to happen afterwards as to how that communication is going to relay to actual action. So I think we do need some other form of some kind of a town hall like Q&A. I also understand that there will be limitations to that, because if we've seen from our COVID meetings, 4 hours long of listening to people and their opinions and their concerns, so they probably need to be happening a little more often. I'm just not 100% sure on how often.
Okay. Kevin?
Before I was on the school board, this was something I called for repeatedly and wanted to see happen. I felt like that was a contributory factor to some of the turmoil we had with the first levy go, that there was not sufficient communication, regardless of the side that was from the school system or those that were in opposition to the levy. And since I've been on the school board, again, go back and watch our Emmy Award-winning YouTube videos and scan through on DVR. Maybe you'll find me actually regularly clamoring, we have to communicate with the community. And I've expressed direct frustration to our board president. Not with respect to him personally, but he begins each school board meeting with, this is a meeting of the board in public, it's not a public meeting, blah, blah, blah. So the little question always floats above my head, well, when is that public meeting? And it clearly shouldn't be during a school board meeting for the reasons we just talked about. We've got the business of the board of the district to conduct. We don't have time to have a back and forth that's in depth over a broad array of subjects. But my gosh, absolutely we should be having community meetings where the people can come to us and we can have the back and forth that was just asked for. And in my worldview or my perspective, it'd be nice once a year at least to have like, hey, let's have a back to school night where we go through and we demonstrate what the school district has done well over the year, but we also have a back and forth opportunity with the school board. But by no means would it be limited just once a year with the school board. It would probably be on the order of 2 to 4 times a year, probably more like 4 times a year, once a quarter. I think that was the suggestion made earlier. We have to do this. I've been a strong advocate for transparency. I pushed for the community meetings, the chat. I'm not satisfied with it next week, but you know what I do know? It's a start. It's unprecedented, and therefore I'm happy with it with regard to that. I pushed to get minutes posted in their entirety. I've pushed to get voting records recorded so people can know how the board members are voting. We can do better. We have to do better, and with me on the board, we will do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
So I actually disagree a little bit in that I think that communicating and being a intermediary with the community is the board's business, just as much as it is working on as oversight and policy setters for the school. I think that the community chat is a step in the right direction, but I think the community really wants to have interaction with the board, not with individual members of the board. And they want to be able to have a back and forth engagement, not a chance, again, to vent at an individual member of the board. I've researched the Ohio School Board Association, and they very, very clearly say that while open communication is possible in a board meeting, under a quorum, that a board member is not required to, but may address topics that they feel prepared to address with the community. So I think that all that really is needed is some extra attention to schedule additional meetings. I agree that once a quarter sounds like a good idea for a timetable that allow specific agenda for the community to bring concerns to the board and have a back and forth question and answer, actual engagement with the policymakers of this community. I also think that, I think I'll summarize with that.
Okay. Audra?
Okay, I think communication was has been a an Achilles heel for the district for a while, and I think the levies really exposed that, especially communication with the community members who are not parents. It's harder to reach those folks. And I originally had this conversation with a lady named Karen that I met through the levy. Everything was going on Facebook, and I just typically, like I do, said, hey, would you like to sit down and talk about this? You seem to have good ideas. And she was the only person during that whole thing that actually did sit down with me to talk about the levy. And the community chats or some version of that was kind of her idea. And we invited her to be on, Dr. Kozad invited her to be on his advisory board. And so this community chat this is a beta test. And remember, the topic of the first one is communication. So if you have ideas like we all just have, folks, we want you to come, because this is what's going to shape what the communication looks like in the future. I will say that I do think that fixing the relationship with the community, or in regard to communication with the community, does start with conversations that happen in person. I have to say, Kevin has been a super strong advocate of this, and I have to give props to Mike as well. Our children attend the same piano studio, but I didn't really know Mike until he and his wife took me up on an offer to let's meet at Panera and let's talk about stuff. And I think that goes a long way. That's how real change happens. Large forums aren't really that super conducive, although sometimes may be valuable. Large community forums are really challenging to make, to really be heard. So come to the chat on the 19th, and let's talk about communication.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I think there's a couple approaches, and they've been brought up, and Audra just brought up one. It is difficult to have a lot of discussion in an open board meeting, especially when you already have a meeting agenda planned, and then get into various other topics that you weren't prepared of or haven't thought of. I like the concept that we're talking about with quarterly meetings that are separate from the board meetings, where there is an open discussion with the community. But those are cumbersome if a lot of people show up and they take lots and lots of time, and people get worn out and they don't feel they get answered, and that's frustrating too. We do have a lot of school committees, and I think that's a way some more parents can be invited in, especially through the strategic plan, that school improvement committee that I suggested, a financial advisory committee, which we may or may not have. I know we have a business advisory committee. There should be a policy committee. There should be, there's people on BSEF, our foundation, but any committee involvement that we can bring our parents in, we do need to do a better job, and I recognize that and support whatever good thoughts people have in working with the board and the administration, the community, to bring that forth. That's our obligation.
Heidi?
I think community relations and communication has been probably the worst crux for this district. It's probably the root of a lot of problems, because the lack of it allows for assumptions to be made that are not correct. And I think we need to take a step back, and this is something I've been calling for years. In fact, I stood before the board 2.5 years ago and said, you say now is not the time to talk, but when is the right time to talk? And it was stonewall. Like, okay. And I've been at board meetings for 15 years and addressed the board, and stones, nothing, not even an emotion, not a thank you for bringing this concern, nothing. And then sometimes when topics get heated and controversial, they would go into executive session to avoid those topics. So I think we have come in, as somebody who's been in the community for as long as I have, probably Dr. St. Pierre's been here longer, but it is crucial that we open these doors, and to realize, I think that a person who brings a concern is not an enemy. And I think that has been, people are afraid to bring concerns because they're targeted, they're labeled then, and they are they're punished for bringing concerns. So I think that needs to change. I think that we need to have large-scale conversations with the board, not just and they need to be topical, so that way we're not getting off on tangents and things like that. But these community chats are a step in the right direction, but we need to really get out there and realize that The biggest stakeholder, yes, parents are important. Parents are very important. But the taxpayers, who are largely ignored in the community, they're the ones that pay these bills, and we have to bring them in, because then we will have, if you have their support and parental support, look at what the school district can do. If we bring every voice to the table and recognize that they are all important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mike, you're going to start off this question. Class sizes at the primary level are too high. What are your thoughts on class sizes, and how can we best help our youngest learners?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think about that every day because my son, who's in the 4th grade, has 32 children in his class. I believe, I could be wrong, I believe that's the highest number of any, at least K through 6. But 32 is way too many. Kindergarten class has 26 students. So as we go through the budget and as we set the priorities of the district, this is something we need to take a very hard look at, and I pledge to do so. Selfishly, my son has 32 kids in his class. But this leads to so many different answers that all turn out for the good for the district. So whatever we can do to take a look at the budget, balance that with all the other considerations of the district, I honestly, I think it needs to be at the top of the list. It really does.
Okay, thank you. Sarah?
Like I believe I mentioned earlier in another question that optimal class sizes for elementary school children is about 18 to 20. I don't know with the growth that we are currently experiencing in Bellbrook Sugar Creek that we can get there. And I don't believe that there's probably anybody here or parents that think we shouldn't try to strive to have smaller class sizes. I don't think it's about merit. I think it has a lot more to do with the finances, because teachers cost money. And we have to consider that. I would love to see all of our elementary school kids, especially since I, selfishly have lots of young children. All of my kids are 1st grade and under, have really small class sizes for that individual attention. I think it would greatly benefit them for the long haul. I'm just not sure how we get there with the financial constraints that we have. If we have the ability to reduce our class sizes, I 100% support that and think that we should.
Okay, thank you. Kevin?
I agree wholeheartedly. In the first week or so of school, I, as a board member, went to Stephen Bell and BCI. And to be very honest with you, I was shocked at the number of kids per class. Again, as a school board member, we don't typically roam the halls and see what's going on. So and anecdotally, I didn't have anybody report it to me what was going on. So when I went to the schools, and I'm trying to assess the risk of these kids from COVID and the recommendation that we go to masking and things like that, I'm like, okay, let me go look. And when I see 32 kids in a classroom, I'm like, my God. So to me, it is compelling and imperative that we do something about the class sizes. Again, this district has entrusted us with the passage of this levy with additional funding, and I think they expect us to use it and use it smartly. And so we talked earlier about busing. I think that's self-evident. We need to do that, but it's also not going to break the bank either. We're talking, the best of all plans, $250,000, and we're not going to do that per year. So, but we need to look at somehow getting, extra teachers in the class. One thing that was mentioned earlier, of course, we're in a 7-year levy that's, it's going to time out. So we talked about potentially something like an earned income tax that we could use, that people that are retired would not have to pay, and potentially substituting that for the property taxes. So when we start talking about needing to get additional funding, obviously another property tax levy is not at all going to be palatable to this community. But if we look at actually removing some of those property tax levies and substituting it with an earned income tax, and by which maybe we could gain some additional funding, and funding that would essentially be indexed to inflation, unlike our property taxes, then potentially we can find a way to get extra teachers in the classroom. But that's something that we need to focus on that in the near term, for like next year, not 5 years from now. We need to find a solution. And I like the suggestion earlier, potentially if we look at and we have enough money, potentially we can use some of the CARES funding for temporary teachers, and hopefully that'll grow. So thank you.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of class sizes comes directly back to teachers. I mean, we have the classrooms. It's a matter of staffing. And we just went through an effort to get funding for the schools. So I think we have to be very, very careful how we choose to use those funds and to what level we choose to improve the class sizes as a metric. At the end of the day, this is going to be something that the community has to support. And if we go back and say, well, we just got through and passed this levy and now we're coming back to ask for an earned income tax for more teachers, I think that's going to be a hard sell in the next several years. So can we do something with some of the savings that we've gotten from the renegotiations and from some of the other things that have shifted in our plan since we passed the levy? Probably. I think it needs to be a community discussion as to what the priorities really are. If you can only get two things, some busing back and 3 new teachers, which is going to reduce class sizes by average of 2 or 3 students per class, what's the greater priority? I don't know that I have a real feeling from the community as to what the most pressing concerns of the many concerns that we have in the district are at this point. Would I advocate for reducing class sizes and working towards that as a metric? Absolutely, but I think it has to be balanced with commitment to the community to stay on budget.
Audra?
I waited tables in college. And when I used to have to make a decision about how to spend my money, I would always equate it to that pair of shoes cost $40. I have to wait on 10 tables. And whenever I'm looking now in this position, whenever I'm looking at spending, whether it be for busing or whether it be for librarians or any of the number of other things that we would love to bring back, I equate it to that's 2 teachers, that's 3 teachers. This is my number one. If I'm getting to choose as a parent what I want to bring back that was cut, I want our kids to have more access to their teacher. And as a special needs parent, I think that our class sizes are even more greatly impacting our special needs population, who just in general need more personal attention. This is my number one.
Thank you. Keith?
Well, I'm absolutely supportive of reducing class sizes, especially at the elementary level. I'll give you an example that we preferred to have K-12 or K students at about 18 to 20 a classroom. We ran it that way for years. We preferred 1 to 2 grade, be about 20 to 22, grades 3 to 5, 24 to 26. And if we started going over that, we looked at getting another teacher, even if it was in August, because we thought it was a great disservice to students. As Mr. Price said, just go look at those classrooms, sit in on one of those classrooms. It's an example of how we are overworking our teachers and underserving our students, and it's a very top high priority and should be addressed as soon as possible. I was surprised that it wasn't addressed after the levy was passed, and greatly disappointed, as others were. If we can do that for years, I don't know why we can't go back to doing it financially now. It takes good fiscal planning. You may need tutoring, you may need aides, you may need volunteer tutors. As my wife and I do it, my daughter's 3rd grade classroom in an adjacent school district. It's amazing how helpful volunteers can be, even an old superintendent. You know, talking to kids in the hallway, reading to them, having them read to us, working their math problems, and watching those kids grow month after month. And it doesn't cost a thing. We just go in and volunteer our time. Something needs to be done. This is unacceptable. Our kids are going to lose out. They're going to suffer for years. It's wrong. We need to fix it soon.
Okay, thank you. Heidi?
Yeah, those the student-to-teacher ratios are unacceptable in this district, and I feel like it was another punitive cut. I feel like there's other things that we could have cut first, but we are where we are. I also had a 4th grader. She did end up coming home because it was just too much. She couldn't move in her classroom. She had 31, I think, and it was just insane. She couldn't learn. It was too loud. So I understand those, especially in the younger grades. We've got to get more teachers. If we have the rooms as Mr. Presnell said, we should be using them. I mean, that we have them for a reason. So we should be utilizing the money that we saved from the health insurance renegotiation. We should be utilizing the COVID funds that, I mean, I believe it would fall under that to space kids out. That's part of COVID protocols. We should be utilizing all of that to our disposal, but we also need to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. And while increased class sizes are not ideal, our teachers rock it. They are doing an amazing job down there, and very few complaints. You know, is it ideal? No, but are they getting the job done? Yes. However, we need to, with COVID, we couldn't have volunteers in, but now I think we really need to readjust our policies and have volunteers in these larger classes to help teachers, you know, do whatever they need done to help take these burdens off until we can come up with a solution. But the solution that we need to work towards is adding teachers at the elementary levels.
Okay, thank you. Cassie?
I mean, I think everyone else has pretty much already said it. We absolutely need to have more teachers in the K through 5 levels. I have a 2nd and 4th grader in the district. My daughter actually attends private kindergarten because I felt it was important, 1, to have the smaller class sizes for kindergarten, and 2, it was actually cheaper for me to do private kindergarten than to do 5-day full-day kindergarten in Bellbrook. I would love to see that change, but with the fact that we're already having an issue hiring additional teachers because of our budget, it makes that an impractical choice right now. I would like to see what the cost for a brand new teacher is fresh out of college and what their benefits package costs to see how many teachers we can actually add and stay within the budget. We have a surplus of $11.7 million. If we bring back busing over the next 4 years, that's $1 million. We're not going to actually do $250,000 per year, but if we brought back some level of busing and say each teacher, I'm just guessing, but say their package benefits and everything is $100,000. If you have their salary, benefits, and everything that you pay, then if you bring back 5 teachers, that's $500,000 a year. I know that would put us running a slight deficit each year, but we have money that's in the bank. We have a significant amount of savings. I think it's worth the investment, even if it means we come back to the voters a year sooner.
Okay, thank you. So it is now 9 o'clock. We made it through 12 questions. Oh, thanks everybody for watching. Woo!